Welcome to the October 17th school board meeting. This meeting is now in session. Please rise as our Career Center Air Force JROTC cadets present the colors.
Color guard and hut. Harry. Color. Forward. Arch. Color guard. Hold. Breathe. That. Colors. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Order. Colors. Center. Is. Forward. March.
Thank you. You may be seated. So October is National Bullying Prevention Month, and for our recognition this evening, our staff will present information about what we are doing in our schools to prevent bullying and harassment. Ms. Johnson, would you please introduce our staff?
I'd like to introduce our Director of Counseling Service, Pam McCullen, please.
I can't stand progressive. Good evening, school board members, Ms. Johnson, the executive leadership team, and all those joining us tonight. In October, we recognize Bullying Prevention Month, and I'm here to share with you what we're doing in the schools. I'll be brief as the video you'll see demonstrates this work in action. Under the strategic plan goal of student well-being, healthy, safe, and supported students is performance objective number 6. This performance objective states that key findings on student surveys, including the Your Voice Matters and the Youth Risk Behavior Survey, will show a reduction in bullying, violence, sexual harassment, and substance use. This objective guides the bullying prevention work, which is initiated by the school counseling teams in each school. They use evidence-based resources and are the designated bullying prevention coordinators. In K through 8, the school counseling team delivers classroom lessons. In 4 of our high schools, a cross-section of adults and students have formed a team to create a climate of belonging for all students by focusing on everyone's strengths and contributions to the school. You can see on the slide the Wakefield Sources of Strength team. APS staff sponsor many impactful events that seek to reduce bullying behaviors and build school unity. There is Wear Orange Day, Unity Day, and School Spirit Day, to name a few. As you can see on the slide, we have placed Be the Eye and Kind banners in each school that can stay up throughout the year as a symbol and reminder for each of us to be kind to one another. Ms. Holly Hawthorne is pictured here as she kicked off Bullying Prevention Month at ATS. Dr. Allen has been overseeing the revisions to the draft policy, PIP, and incident form that will update our procedures around bullying behavior reporting and our investigative and notification processes. We work together as Student Services leads the prevention effort and works with students once the investigation has concluded. Administrators are the key staff who receive and investigate bullying complaints. Data obtained in the Youth Risk Behavior Survey and Your Voice Matters provides us with information to track our progress in meeting performance objective number 6's goals. We have the dual goal of increasing reporting and reducing bullying incidents. To understand more specifically what students are experiencing, we have revised and created new questions in the upcoming Your Voice Matters survey, and we'll use those results to set our baseline goal going forward for 2024. We now want to show you a video of this work. Click it again. October is Bullying Prevention Month. APS students learn about peer conflicts and bullying prevention through classroom lessons. Schools also hold events that increase a sense of belonging. We know that a sense of belonging is important because students will feel less stressed, happier, and more engaged in their learning. Elementary students learn how to recognize, refuse, and report bullying.
The first step in preventing bullying is to recognize if the situation is actually bullying. Bullying is being mean to someone on purpose. It happens over and over again, and it hurts your feelings, body, or belongings. Bullying is one-sided or unfair. It can happen on social media, online, or in person.
Once you recognize bullying, you have to report to an adult you trust, like a counselor, teacher, or parent. You can say, I need to report bullying, or someone is bullying me and I want it to stop. Reporting is not the same thing as tattling. Tattling is just trying to get someone in trouble, but when you report, you are trying to get something unsafe to stop. When you refuse bullying, you are telling the person to stop it. Try to use an assertive voice that is calm, that is serious, calm, and respectful. Try to keep your back straight, shoulders down, and make sure you're facing the person you're talking to.
Bullying situations involve at least 3 people: the person who is being bullied, the person who's doing the bullying, and then the other people who know what is happening. Those people are called bystanders. Bystanders make the situation worse by not helping the victim.
At Campbell, we took a pledge to be safe in our community by being upstanders. Upstanders can refuse the bullying by standing up to the bully.
Campbell students K through 5 receive lessons on bullying prevention, and we've all taken the Upstander pledge to proactively combat bullying at Campbell.
We are upstanders!
In middle school, students are taught how to manage serious peer conflicts, manage their strong emotions, and also strategies to prevent bullying.
Do you want me to do it then?
Sure. The counselors help us to learn how to report bullying, and they help us manage bullying when we see it happening to us or others.
And who's being bullied again, guys? John. That's right. Okay. And he's in what grade?
Yeah, he's a 6th grader.
Okay. Who's doing the bullying? It's Jeremy, right?
Yeah.
Okay. The anonymous bullying report page for Swanson's website is to help kids who feel like they have been bullied report their trauma to a website instead of a person, so they feel safer to talk about it.
So what are your thoughts about Swanson?
All APS middle schools use the Second Step Counseling Curriculum, which is an evidence-based program to address the social emotional needs of students. Through the bully prevention program, students learn how to effectively report bullying and to develop positive relationships with adults in the school.
This year, students at Washington, Liberty, Yorktown, Wakefield, and HB Woodlawn are participating in a program called Sources of Strength. Sources of Strength is designed to help every student feel a sense of belonging in their school.
So they might not even be comfortable with other classmates.
Sources of Strength is a group to help turn high schoolers into peer leaders.
To help combat the stigma that comes around mental health, suicide, bullying in high schools and just around APS in general.
It's really taught us that a lot of high schoolers are dealing with the same problems, dealing with the same things. So if you see someone going through something difficult, it's helping us recognize those symptoms and teaching us strategies that we can use to help them and make the school overall a more inclusive environment.
And so we're hoping that this will help build resiliency within each student, so when they do face tough times, they're able to still move forward and find the help when they need the help.
We know that each student needs a trusted adult that they can talk with in school. It can be someone who's easy to talk with and someone that you trust. We want every student in APS to have a trusted adult that they can talk with in school. When situations become hard to manage, it's nice to know that you have a dependable and caring support in your school. We want our students to be safe, and we know that bullying prevention is a very important topic. Remember, we're all in this together. Students did a great job. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. McClellan. Board members, would you like to make any comments? Okay. You would,
now?
well, if you would like to make comments on the recognition, yes, that would be now.
No, sorry.
Oh, no, that's okay.
Announcement, sorry.
Oh, no, it's okay. Well, I would like to just make some comments regarding Bullying Prevention Month. Apologies. And I want to thank, first of all, I want to recognize so many principals that we have here this evening, and I think that the principal here for Swanson is here this evening, so it's wonderful to see your students on the video. Thank you. Ms. Renee Harbour. And I wanted to share that the school board knows that childhood bullying is a significant problem nationwide, and it can cause school absenteeism, mental and physical stress, poor school performance, poor self-esteem, and even school violence. School board members, superintendents, teachers, and parents all can play a critical role in creating a climate where bullying is not tolerated. It has been proven when adults and children stand together, bullying ends. So thank you to the staff throughout all of our schools and programs, and thanks to our APS families for joining in this important work. We are grateful to be working here in APS to prevent bullying and the passion and dedication that our staff and leaders and students have in this cause. So thank you for being here this evening to present it. Thank you for all the people here who are working in this cause. And I think we're now going to move to announcements. So on October 21st, the board will hold a closed meeting, 5 p.m. in the school board conference room. October 22nd, we will have a work session on English learners program evaluation at 7 p.m. here in rooms 254 and 256. And on October 29th, we have a closed meeting at 5 p.m. in rooms 254 and 256. And finally, on November 6th, we will hold 2 work sessions. The first will be an employee pre-budget work session from 5 to 6 p.m. The board will break for dinner, then hold a work session on planning for the fiscal year 2021-2030 capital improvement plan at 7 p.m. here in the board meeting room. Board members, do you have any announcements? Okay, Mr. Goldstein?
Okay, thank you. I have a few announcements about a couple of my liaison schools. So first, at Long Branch Elementary, the 5th grade went to MedStar to attend a STEAM event where they learned about STEAM in the National Hockey League. And the CAP's head chef spoke to the students, as well as gold medalist Haley Skarupa. At Kenmore, a Kenmore student has initiated a regional relief drive for victims of Hurricane Dorian. Please drop off household items at Kenmore Middle School. A list of items is on the Kenmore Twitter page. This is an Eagle Scout project, and direct delivery of all donated goods is managed through Boy Scouts of America. And the student and Kenmore, thank you for your support. The 7th graders there at Kenmore have registered for the mock election, which will simulate civic duty as part of the 7th grade civics and economics course, and the election will be held in November. And finally, Kenmore is the host site for the APS celebration of Hispanic Heritage Month that will occur tomorrow, Friday, October 18th, and all are welcome to attend. I believe that's 6:30 that it starts. Is that correct?
The resource fair starts at 6 and the event starts at 7 p.m. is my recollection.
6 and 7, thank you. As I said, all are welcome to attend. An authentic cultural display in the main hallway was made possible by Kenmore parent contributions and represents Latin American countries and influences which make Arlington the vibrant community that it is. Finally, Campbell Elementary School, and I saw up on the monitor that we're going to be making an announcement about that, so I will defer to the superintendent on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Goldstein. Ms. Van Doren, do you have any announcements?
Thank you. I know that you may have noticed I have a hat on tonight. While I do appreciate the Nats and their win, I picked it because it sort of fit the occasion. But I'm wearing it because I have a concussion, and I continue to have symptoms related to that. And it is a result of a fall I had 2 months ago. So I'm wearing it because I was admonished by my doctor to wear it when I was in settings with lots of lights and monitors and lots of movement, which is board meetings. And I don't like hats inside, so it's not my preferred mode of wearing, but I find that I'm not as exhausted after the meeting when I do that, and it's easier to attend to what's going on. So I thought I would turn lemons into lemonade and use it as an opportunity to remind us that concussions are difficult. They're difficult for our students when they have them. There's a whole protocol and policies that we have in APS related to this. Debbie DeFranco is here tonight, and she's been holding my hand through this. And I've had the opportunity to see a specialist who is worked with APS in putting together our protocols. So I just say, teachers, be patient with kids because the symptoms come and go. Kids, take it seriously because the longer you put off doing things that the doctor tells you to do, the longer it takes for the concussion to go away. And parents, it's not like it was when we were kids. Everything you thought you knew about handling a concussion is not the case. Talk to your doctor, go to the concussion specialist, and you will learn a lot that will help your kids or yourself. So that's why the hat, it does fit the theme, but I was trained and brought up never wear a hat inside, so it's very hard for me to do, but it really actually does help with the lights and electronics. And I was taught today that the amount of electronics we use in our lives today and the amount of lighting and stuff we have, that this is even more important for our kids, and exercise. So that's my PSA for today.
Thank you, Ms. Van Doren. Any other announcements? I do want to take this opportunity to provide an update on the superintendent search process. The deadline for proposals to our request for proposal was this past Friday, October 11th. We received a number of proposals and we have begun the evaluation process. We are still on track for awarding the contract in the November-December timeframe. And we are now at our consent agenda. May I have a motion to adopt the consent agenda?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes 5-0. And I recognize that I skipped over the superintendent's announcement and update, so I apologize for that. But I will come back after update to announce the wonderful things that we adopted on our consent agenda. And I apologize for that skip over. I'll keep the suspense.
No apology needed at all. Good evening, school board members. I'm happy to provide the superintendent's updates today. I want to start by actually thanking Pam McCullen and her entire department for all the work that they do around bullying, but also in terms of just providing supports for our students as they navigate their schooling experiences. So thank you to you and your team. So we want to congratulate Campbell. They are going to be awarded the EL credential for excellence. And the credential is in the area of character and scholarship from EL Education. It's a leading K-12 education nonprofit working to close opportunity gaps. The staff received the recognition at EL's National Conference in Atlanta earlier today. The hallmark of EL Education's approach is an expanded definition of students' achievement that combines student character and high-quality work with mastery of knowledge and skills. The EL Education Credential recognizes schools that have attained remarkable achievement impact with all students in each of these areas through deep implementation of EL Education school model. So we are very proud and extend our congratulations to Campbell. Harvesting Dreams for Our Children is coming up tomorrow on October the 18th. This is taking place at Kenmore. As part of the Hispanic Heritage Month, this annual event and resource fair is geared towards APS students pre-K through 12th and their families. And this is designed to gain new resources, new ideas, and to make connections that will actually help our students succeed. This event will feature student performance and is being offered in Spanish with English translation. So come out and join us. I also want to note that we will have staff on site during this event, as we have had for many events, and they'll be available to help families with the annual online verification process. That support will be available in Spanish and English. And as we approach the end of October, I'm really pleased to report that 66% of our families have completed the process. So we're going to have additional opportunities during parent-teacher conference that will take place later this month. Para concluir el mes de herencia hispana, tendremos el evento anual Cosechando Sueños para Nuestros Niños. Gracias a todos los padres y estudiantes quienes participan. Todas las familias pueden obtener información sobre recursos, ideas para ayudar a sus hijos a tener éxito. Muchísimas gracias a todas las familias. So I shared this at the last meeting, but I want to remind everyone about the Alice West Fleet Elementary School dedication ceremony. They're also going to have their fall festival, and that's taking place this Saturday from 10 until 2:30. The official ribbon cutting and the new school colors and mascot will be revealed, and this will happen at 10 a.m. So we want to have all of the members of the Fleet family come and enjoy the event and participate in the activities, because from 10:30 to 2:30, families and community members will be able to enjoy music, self-guided tours, bounce houses for the kids, and much more fun. So a lot of work has gone into making this new school possible, and we do want to acknowledge the staff and the community partners, as well as our school board members and community members and county who have supported this school process. We are expecting a large crowd, and we hope the community will come out and participate in this event. We have our rising 6th grade and 9th graders, and they are invited to the upcoming information nights to learn more about middle school and high school. Principals and school staff will be there to provide an overview of their schools and to answer any questions that families may have. So middle school information night will be on October the 28th at Washington Liberty, and that's taking place at 7 p.m. And high school information night will be the following week on November the 4th, also at Washington Liberty at 7 p.m. Saturday, October the 26th, from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m., we want to let the families know that the Arlington County Police Department, Arlington County Sheriff's Office, and the Drug Enforcement Administration will give the public its 18th opportunity in 9 years to prevent pill abuse and theft by ridding their homes of potentially dangerous, expired, unused, and unwanted prescription drugs. This disposal service is free and anonymous, no questions asked. The Arlington County Department and Sheriff's Office will collect prescription drugs at the sites on the slide. And more information is available in Peach Jar, as well as the Arlington County Police Department website. We wanted to remind you that open enrollment for all employees is taking place now, and it will continue through October the 31st. All benefit eligible employees may add insurance or change coverage for relevant benefits. There will be multiple benefit fairs and events to meet representatives from the vendors and to receive assistance. APS also offers the flu shots at no cost to its employees, regardless of their insurance coverage, and this is occurring during the month of October. And employees can take advantage of this to ensure that they stay healthy during the flu season. I want to draw your attention to a number of events that are coming up as we approach the first grading period, the end of the first grading period, which is taking place on November the 4th. Parent-teacher conferences are being held on October the 24th and 25th. In addition, report cards for middle school and high school students are going to be issued on November the 15th, and for elementary students on November the 22nd. This is an important time for families to dialogue with your teacher and your students regarding their progress and how families and schools can work together to benefit the educational needs of our students. So we want to encourage all parents, guardians to use this time with their teachers to communicate openly and to work in partnership. We wanted to provide an update on our enrollment numbers as of September the 30th, and we can see that we have approximately 584 more students than we did last year, September 30th, so our count is 27,436 students. This number reflects pre-K through 12th grade. And I know everyone has been aware of my campaign 42 and 42 in an effort to try to visit all 42 sites and programs, and I'm really very excited about that, the journey that I've been on. I'm actually at about 38 now, with an opportunity to visit many sites multiple times. It's a reminder to me and a reminder to everyone, it is about our students. So I've had many opportunities to interact with students. I was actually at Yorktown yesterday and had an opportunity to start my day by meeting all of our freshman students. And it was a great time to kind of share what I hope and wish for them as they begin their high school journey. But I've had many opportunities along those lines. So a reminder, our students are our gift, and I really do look forward to more visits and more opportunities to learn from the teachers, from students, as well as the community. We want to share with you as a reminder that, again, the school board's action plan has been posted online, and it has been shared and will continue to be shared with the community via APS communication channels. We have some updates on projects from the main areas identified here. So the position of Chief Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer has been posted and is being featured online. This position is a direct report to the superintendent. HR is advertising the position for 4 weeks and will accept applications through October the 31st. And we will then begin the process of reviewing the applications and talking to potential candidates. While the position is posted, HR will be engaging with key stakeholder groups to obtain input related to the position as far as desired characteristics in the applicants and hope for what the position will accomplish. This will help to inform the interview process and questions we will ask of each candidate. The interview process will take place in November and will include 3 rounds of interviews, including the executive leadership team and a cross-sectional leadership and support staff panel consisting of key departments and advisory committee representatives. As I mentioned at the last meeting, we're excited that construction began last month on the new elementary school at the Reed site. October is a busy month for the Career Center project with 3 meetings for the building level planning committee, and the next one's going to be held on October the 29th. In addition, we will start community engagement for the planning phase of the 2020 elementary school boundary process by November. There is an engage page with some preliminary information already, and more details and a timeline for engagement opportunities will come by November the 1st. We want to make it easy for community members to find out the monthly projects and updates on facilities, which can include the timeline, the status of construction, pictures, and more. So the information on this slide can help you to get more information about these project updates. A lot of information. And here we continue to provide and review school board policies and recommending revisions and new policies that might be needed. So far, the board has adopted several revised or new policies this school year, including those related to the superintendent, internal audits, and school liaisons. At each meeting, we'll continue providing a list of important policies on the agenda for review this year, the progress being made, and where community members can get additional information. And community members are encouraged to visit the APS Engage site so that they can learn more about school board initiatives and find out about community engagement opportunities. Thank you, school board members.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. I'm going to open the table to board members for comments or questions. Do you have any comments or questions? Okay, great. I think I misheard our enrollment number, and if you could just go back to that slide. I think we hit 28,000, but I thought
October
I
is
heard-
bullying. October.
I'll watch that again, too. I thought I heard 27,000, so I just want to double check, because I think we broke 28,000. So we have 28,020 students in our pre-K through 12. So we broke the 28,000 number for our enrollment.
Final enrollment, thank you for pointing that out, as of September the 30th, 28,020. Thank you.
We went over 28,000. Okay, excellent. Thank you. I think I saw 27 in. Okay, that was very helpful. It's 28,020 students as of September 30th. Excellent.
Correct.
Thank you. I don't have any other additional questions or comments, so thank you, Ms. Johnson.
Thank you.
Yes.
I didn't prepare Ms. Johnson for this, but I want to provide a compliment. I had the opportunity on Monday to sit in on one of the professional learning opportunities for, our kids were home, but our staff was all training. And I know there was a lot of training, and I should have asked that you might list some, because I think sometimes the community doesn't understand that we keep doing that training throughout the year. And I sat through a morning session, which was actually just part of a 2 full-day session, which had, I think, over 50 administrators and teachers in it on restorative practices. And I was very impressed with what they were doing, and I think it will really help us begin to achieve our goal of connecting students to individuals in the school system, addressing mental health, as well as reducing our discipline numbers. So I want to thank Dr. Allen for putting that together. I was very, very impressed with that. I hope that goes widely. And I know that at the same time, there was deep equity training going on elsewhere, and those are just 2 that I know of that completely connect to our priorities. So just wanted to thank you. And if you, I know I didn't ask you about this, but if you wanted to comment on any of that, that would be great, because I think the community should know that we're constantly doing this training. So thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity to comment, because it is pretty amazing. So the Day of Learning provided an opportunity for learning for a lot of our different scales. I actually started my morning with the transportation department, so the entire department was there at Yorktown and had an opportunity to hear from different individuals. A big part of their training was around safety and security, the same modules that we're all having to be trained on. So I welcome that, and then I participated in a number of different sessions. There was Strength Finder was one of the sessions that was done by one of our principals. Another session was done by School and Community on how to engage the community in positive interactions. And then I also had an opportunity to go over to Washington Liberty and see some of the restorative practice. But I want to extend a heartfelt thank you to all of the individuals that actually took time to conduct presentations and training for our staff. There were many, many sessions at 3 different locations, and I think across departments, but in terms of the leadership and the planning, to Sue Sarber and her staff in the Department of Teaching and Learning. So thank you, Ms. Van Dorn.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. So we had jumped over to our consent agenda, which we adopted, and we have some announcements to make of what we adopted on the consent agenda, but I just want to take a moment before I do that. I know the suspense must be killing you. I just want to take a moment before I do that to acknowledge that we have wonderful leadership here this evening that don't always have the opportunity to join us. And I also want to recognize how much you are all out in the community already, and taking an evening to be here with the school board is greatly appreciated. And so I want to make note of our principals, Margaret Chung, Bridget Loft, Renee Harbor, Casey Robinson, Lori Wiggins. Thank you for being here. And I see some of our staff that I don't think have presentations this evening, because many of them do come here for presentations, like Miss Wendy Pilch, Debbie DeFranco, Shannon Ellis, Carolyn Jackson, Wendy Carrera, Pam Farrell, Pam McClellan, thank you, but she had a presentation this evening, but, you know, I appreciate that, and Jeff Chambers and Mr. Meikle here. But I just want to take a moment to acknowledge that, because we do recognize how much you're doing already for our system and what it means to be here on this evening, and that we do go late. And so I just want to say thank you for being here. So now I'm going to get to our consent agenda, what we adopted. All right. Yes. Oh, please.
May I make one more comment that I had on my notes, and that is to say that last night we had the Black Parent Alliance sessions that were offered at Gunston Middle School, and that was through the Department of Equity and Excellence. And again, great learning opportunities, great resources for our parent community, and great leadership to make that possible. And I see individuals who really provided some of those sessions yesterday. So I wanted to build on your thank yous as well there.
Oh, excellent. Thank you. And I hope I didn't miss anybody, and if I did, please stand. Oh, good. I knew they wouldn't do it. Just kidding. No. Okay, so I would like to announce that under consent, the board appointed Natalia Uro de Leon, I tried to read that in English, but that was not going to work. Natalia Uro de Leon as a student representative to the Joint Facilities Advisory Commission. I'm also pleased to announce that as part of our consent agenda, Ms. Bridget Loft was appointed Assistant Superintendent, Teaching and Learning. I am extremely pleased to announce that the board appointed Bridget Loft as Assistant Superintendent, Teaching and Learning. Thank you. Ms. Loft has over 25 years of experience in education. In APS, she taught social studies at Wakefield High School and has served as assistant principal at both Swanson Middle School and at Wakefield High School. In 2012, Ms. Loft was appointed as principal of Swanson, where she shepherded the school through an enrollment growth from 800 students to 1,200 students over 6 years. She also worked with faculty members to create the Swanson Equity Team, which focused on cultural competency issues that impact student learning. Appointed principal of Yorktown High School in 2017, she has led the school with transparency, consistency, and purpose. She actively engages staff in analyzing performance data to make sound decisions that guide instruction, and has fostered collaborative learning teams who work to develop differentiated student enrichment and intervention opportunities. Ms. Loft's leadership practices promote a culture of inclusion and acceptance of the whole child, and she has supported student affinity and empowerment groups. She has also coordinated professional learning that builds cultural competency skills. Her vision led to the creation of equity teams focused on addressing cultural competency challenges that impact student learning. A talented administrator with a proven record of excellence, leadership, and cultural transformation, we believe Ms. Loft will work well with the board, executive leadership team, instructional staff, and all stakeholders as the new Assistant Superintendent of Teaching and Learning. And do you have anyone celebrating here with you this evening? By chance? Perhaps.
My husband, Andrew Loft.
Pleasure to meet you.
Yes, a former Wakefield High School band director.
Wow.
And I want to thank my principal colleagues and my DTL colleagues, and also some reporters from the Yorktown Century.
Excellent. So exciting. It was very exciting to, sometimes during board meetings, we do really great stuff. We will now hear citizen comment on non-agenda items. Before the speakers begin, I'll review the speaker guidelines. And we do have speakers, is that correct, Ms. Ricardo? Okay. And again, thank you all for coming this evening. It was great to see all of you here. The Arlington School Board welcomes public comment during most regular meetings and at public hearings. Generally, school board members do not respond to public comment during a meeting or hearing. Each speaker may speak up to 2 minutes. Our clerk will start the timer when the speaker begins, and the speaker should conclude their remarks when the buzzer sounds. The board generally allows up to 30 minutes for citizen comment on non-agenda items at the beginning of meetings. If a large number of speakers are expected on a particular topic, the board may limit the total time for comment and/or may reduce the time allotted for each speaker and will announce this change in advance. Speakers are encouraged to prepare their remarks to fit within 2-minute limit. Speakers may address an item on a board meeting agenda when the item is heard, or may address an item not on the agenda during citizen comment on non-agenda items. All comments should address a matter related to Arlington Public Schools. The school board requests that comments related to an individual student-related matter be directed to the appropriate staff and not shared at a public meeting where the disclosure could violate applicable confidentiality requirements. Speakers will present their comments from the podium and are encouraged not to engage in personal attacks. The school board expects that each speaker will be courteous, modeling for our students how one can respectfully disagree with others' views. Speakers will address their comments to the entire school board and not to one individual board member, the superintendent, a staff member, or the audience. To ensure all citizens have an opportunity to speak, the board has established the following guidelines. Any person with a disability who needs accommodation to provide public comment is requested to contact the school board office at 703-228-6015 at least 3 business days in advance of a meeting to request assistance. Any person who would like the board to provide an interpreter to assist them in providing public comment is requested to contact the school board office at least 5 business days in advance of a meeting to request assistance. The board will make every effort to provide interpretation. If a speaker addresses the board in a language other than English and has an interpreter, speaker will have 2 minutes to speak, and the interpreter will have up to 2 additional minutes to translate the comments for the board.
Okay, Ms. Simone Walker?
Before I begin, Camille is holding up a text of what a dyslexia student sees when they read and the translation for what regular people without dyslexia sees. Good afternoon, I'm Simone Walker. I'm here again from the NAACP Education Committee in continuing with Dyslexia Awareness Month. We have a special education crisis in APS, and much of it has to do with reading disabilities. A long, drawn-out cycle of waiting and fighting to get one's child evaluated, and once evaluated, fighting for effective reading intervention and IEP compliance. It is a frustrating and devastating process, prompting well-off parents to pull their children out of APS and send them to private school, while the children of modest means or unsuspecting parents languish, falling further and further behind. This is the achievement gap that never closes. I'm urging the school board to start playing offense with learning disabilities rather than defense. Take an aggressive, proactive approach to early identification using effective screening tools such as RAN-RAS and scientifically proven phonics-based reading programs such as the Wilson system, and doing so universally for every student in every single school. This is the only way to guarantee a reduction in the achievement gap and in the number of students who will even need special education. This is a no-brainer. I urge you to embrace the wisdom of investing the money up front in order to save a lot more down the road. Essentially, pay now or pay exponentially more later in costly remediation and legal fees. If you care about literacy, if you care about closing the achievement gap, if you care about equity, and if you really care about the least among us and how they will fare after leaving APS, then show your value and allocate more money to effective early identification and evidence-based intervention. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Do you have any more speakers? Okay. Ms. Johnson, did you have some comments?
Yes, I would like to comment. I realize you were here at our last meeting as well, and we have had the opportunity to follow up on what you have brought to our attention, and I did want you to know that I'm working with DTL, our Department of Teaching and Learning, to further explore the RAS-FAS, for example, in terms of meeting the needs of our students. So we will be following up. So thank you for taking the time to share those concerns with us.
Thank you, Dr. Johnson. Appreciate that.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. We have one monitoring item tonight, the annual update on minor construction and major maintenance. Ms. Johnson, would you like to introduce this item?
Mr. Chadwick?
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. I'm going to pass this over to our leader of the MCMM program, Jim Meikle, Director of Maintenance Services.
Good evening, School Board. And here to present an update on MCMM, which is minor construction and major maintenance. I thought that's what the big crowd was here for, but apparently not. So, look at this. So I'll first do a quick overview of what we're going to look at here. I won't read them all out. I'm delighted that the new presentation format gives us two opportunities to be positive. Good news and bright spots, so you'll get a little bit early and a little bit at the end. I'll also speak a little bit to bond funding, because we have infrastructure bonds, which is like a complement to our MCMM program, but the two kind of work hand in hand. So first, I'll review the makeup of the committee, a broad spectrum of stakeholders involved, several of F&O staff, and then for finance, we have the financial analyst, Mr. Frieda, and we have school staff representation at each level, high, middle, and elementary. And so the groups from each of those select their own person to come each year and represent that group. And then we do have citizen input through our Facility Advisor Council liaison. And I'm glad to say for the third year we're going to have John Giambalvo, who's the chair of the committee, working with us. That's worked out very well. We also will then call to the meeting any specific expert witnesses we might need. So a good example is always HVAC. We'll probably have 10 or 15 HVAC projects competing for funds. And so the committee, who might not all understand it, might not all be super technical, will call in the HVAC supervisor and others to get their opinions on where the priorities lie. So some good news. The first one is obvious. I mean, it's the ongoing funding stream, which we really appreciate. Considering the budget pressures that have been on the last couple of years, we're sustaining a really high level of support for MCMM and for the infrastructure bonds. They just keep rolling. We prorated, when I speak to our colleagues in neighbouring districts, they are all kind of impressed by the resources that we are given. So by comparison, we're doing very well for the size of our system. So thank you. One of my favourites, the relocatables. So we spent several years converting from leased relocatables to owned relocatables. And originally we predicted that would be a very positive thing. Now I can tell you unequivocally, we have exceeded $4 million in cost avoidance through that programme. I'm instructed to call it cost avoidance. I'm tempted to call it savings. But anyway, that's good news. The other thing we do is we have 4 buildings off the grid with no activities or large work scheduled. Let me try and explain that a little bit. When we get together with the summer school folks, we pick out the buildings they need, we tell them the buildings we need for major projects, then we pull in the camps, the Parks and Rec folk, and we talk to them about what their needs are. What we've done the last 2 years is we've actually, rather than having them spread in 12 or 14 elementary schools, we've compacted them and we say to them they can have 4 entire schools. And we've tried to help by having those geographically spread from the top to the bottom of the county. And that's worked out very well because it's allowed us then to leave 4 or 5 schools, 4 this year, basically unused during the summer, which means we can set back the HVAC. and setting back the HVAC by 10 degrees in 4 schools for the entire summer. I can't put an exact number on it. My energy manager advised me that I'm comfortable in the tens of thousands. So, you know, that's another positive move. Each year we learn another thing we can do. Summary of our projects. And if you like math, this is not the chart for you. And that's because the numbers are not all even, because we have projects that start mid-year sometimes. We have projects that roll over 2 years, and projects that come in as emergencies. So the main thing to focus on here is, for this summer we had targeted 124 projects. We completed most of them, 88%, which is good. And then we still have 18 going on, and that math doesn't work. And that's because there must have been a few projects that have carried on from the previous year. A reason for that would typically be long lead times on equipment. And I'd like to come back to that in a minute. So some examples of individual projects. I'm not going to read through them all. You've seen them before. What we've tried to do here is, again with the new format, is try and tie some things very specifically back to the strategic plan. So you'll see that symbol on a few of our slides. Some system-wide projects that we have throughout the district, also described here. And again, there's a different strategic plan symbol showing up here. We used 3 or 4 of them throughout this presentation, but the key is, hopefully what we do relates to all of them, directly or indirectly. Some photographs for a bit of relief. On the left side, standard stuff, carpets, painting, new playground. And then in the centre, I'd like to focus on the centre top for a minute, just to advertise how far we've came with cameras. We have a new security coordinator, James Powell, giving him a shout out here, because he in about a year has made tremendous programme with the cameras. I deliberately and carefully put a shot in that has no people in it, just in case that matters. But that is Community High School in the centre there, and that is typical of the kind of mixture of views that we have in just about all the buildings now, certainly in the high schools and middle schools especially. Shots on the right show a couple of things that I will come back to if I can in a minute. So, looking at the progress of MCMM over time, over 10 years, I took a 10-year period, here it's here. And so when we started out, the allocation was typically around 2.5 million. We would get over 800 requests from individual schools. So that was about 80% of everything we got, and 20% was coming from us, from inspections and analysis. Now, the good news is in 2018, the allocation is 6.5 million, tremendous. Under 200 requests from schools, less than 15% requests from schools, and more than 85% from inspections, central inspection and analysis. And so I think the good news there is our customers have bought in. It's been going long enough for them to see it. Most of them see a share of it somehow over a period of time. And I think they believe in the system. So we're pleased about that. So we've gone from wish list, that was my little demonstration here. We've gone from a wish list system to a professional analysis system, much better. So they asked us to share some lessons we learned, and we did learn a few lessons. And here they are. We'll need to adjust our budget and estimates to include projected updates in fire and stormwater codes. That sounds like a normal thing. But this year, we even had some in-year changes. And we ended up in especially at 3 locations where we had to include permanent fire facilities by the relocatables. We ended up having to put in pipe stands at the very last minute. So we had kids scrambling. In fact, for the first time, we had a few kids who did not get into the classroom on the first day. And we take that very personally. So we'll make sure it doesn't happen again. It's never too early for us to engage with the county. We had our first meeting with the county about relocatables, for example, in February, and we were still scrambling on Labour Day weekend to get everything completed and get our certificates. And they were cooperative. They were helpful. We met with them regularly. So maybe we can find a way to start even earlier on anything we're sure we're going to need for next summer. And we may have to start planning some projects 2 summers ahead. So we have a system that you will know when you approve the budget in May, you approve something called advance buys. That allows us, the day after you approve the budget, to purchase long lead time items so we can try and get them done in the summer. What we've learned for sure now is we can't even do that with some of them. So in the first week of May, you say, here's the budget, we've approved this project, and it's for a chiller. It has a 16-week lead time. So the summer's gone, and we can't get it done. And that's typical of some large equipment that has long lead times. So I think we might start thinking this round, not just about next summer, but about the following summer. And if there's any large critical items we should plan for 1 year in advance. Some bright spots. So we ran out of bike racks over the summer, and we had a lot. So that was great. Demand is great. We have replenished the stock. We've filled all the orders, so we're up to date, and we still have a few. We've never seen as many kids cycle at school. It's great. Gunston and Randolph, 2 massive projects over 2 years each, have come to a relatively successful conclusion. We're still doing some commissioning. I acknowledge Matt Williams, who was our contract project manager on those 2 projects, way too big for our own staff to manage. And so he took very good care of those projects, and he's got us an excellent outcome. Small synthetic playfields. We've got 2, and they've been a great success. And they offer significantly increased outdoor recess time, and that's what it's about. Barrett is a great example. It had a small patch that was a mud patch during the winter and a dust bowl in the summer. Now it's a lovely little small green patch, and the kids can get out regularly. And Dan has left, actually, the former principal there, but he shared with us it had a significant impact on their ability to get kids out daily, and we know we want them outdoors. Oh, sorry, jumped too far here. Bear with me. I only have 1 slide out of sync. I want to just talk briefly about infrastructure bonds. I guess I flicked by it, sorry. In 2008, we didn't have infrastructure bonds. We didn't have a funding mechanism that was somewhere in between MCMM and the level of funds that needed and entire school renovations. But we needed some roofs, that's where it started. And roofs in the 2 to 3 million range would have wiped out our MCMM immediately for the whole year. So we innovated. We came up with this approach where maybe we could get some bond funds, because these things are going to last 20 years, to do it. And we got started, and ever since then, the voters continue to approve the bonds. And what's amusing about that is occasionally I'll hear, but you know, there's only 20% of the people in the county who have kids in the household. Well, it says a lot. It says that 60% of people who don't have kids in the household are also voting for the school bonds. So they're supporting us. Very important. And then, in summary, we've now spent over $40 million on new roofs, HVAC, and lighting over that period. Some tremendous progress. Now, let me get back in order again. So finally, a couple of thank yous. There's been a lot of thank yous tonight, but I have to give them. Gerald Brandt, the MCMM Programme Manager, doing a tremendous job. Stephen Bernheisel, those are the 2 guys that make most of these projects tick over on a daily basis. And then Mike Fried, I mentioned earlier. Mike's a guy who shuffles our money around, and he always seems to make it work for us. So he's a vital member of our team too. And now we're about to start on the cycle all over again. So with that, I'll try to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Mr. Meikle. I appreciate the presentation. Colleagues, do we have any questions? Oh, do we have speakers? Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Jordan. Do we have any questions? Go ahead, Ms.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Meikle. Nice presentation, and I know you've done a lot of great work. Sometimes it's, I'm sure you get a lot of input
We do.
from our
We really appreciate it.
schools and staff and parents, and I know you're really on top of a lot of different things. I really want to thank you. I was the liaison to Barrett when we were talking about the field, and it was great to see that get resolved. They were very happy with that solution, and also the Gunston HVAC system. You guys were great about communicating and keeping everyone informed and getting that done. So
Thank you.
Thanks very much for that. I have a few questions, and Ms. Talento, I know you want to move around, so I'll ask a couple of them, and if you want to move to someone else, that's great. So my first one, I want to ask about the relocatables, a couple of things about them. And I appreciate your comment about ownership is definitely avoiding costs for us. I think the number in our system is 126 relocatables. It's something like that. And so what I'm wondering, though, is at every point in time, especially this year as we've built some new schools, I believe it's the case that we actually have sort of some surplus relocatables that are spread around across our schools. I'm thinking Oak Ridge, for example, some schools that are really now well-suited to their own capacity. I'm under the impression that we kind of just have them because we have them now and we have to have them somewhere. But I wonder how we're thinking about the management of that, and especially with your point about the energy savings you get when you don't have to operate a school during the summer.
Right.
If we operate those relocatables, we're spending money. So I'm wondering how we're thinking about the management of those, what I believe are surplus relocatables around our system. I know Mr. Chadwick might be, whoever wants
It's
to
a good
respond.
question. I'll start on it, and John will intervene if he sees fit. So, yeah, Oak Ridge you mentioned, I don't really get that at the moment. You know, as far as we know, Oak Ridge have got what they need. Now, they may transpire to have a class or two more, but overall they've got a lot of relocatables there, and as far as we understand at the moment, they need them. So we'll see what the new numbers say about that. In terms of surplus, we have a couple left at Patrick Henry that will go away very shortly. We have a surplus, in a sense, at Williamsburg and at Swanson. And the reason we left them there is because it's easier than trying to find storage. When we stored a few last year at the Kenmore field, there was a lot of issues with the neighbours and so forth. So they're still there, and they don't need them all. I think they'll probably use them while they're there, but we know that we will be able to use that stock when we find out what's happening next year.
And the other thing is that we're doing is we have in the past had a number of standalone single relocatable classrooms, and we're almost at the point where we've got rid of all of those because they work more efficiently and the security is a little better when they're in multiplexes. So we're going to be a little bit behind just to make sure that we have enough for next year. We have to balance selling them to other school divisions with how many we may need in the next year.
So if I understand you, then we're carrying a buffer of surplus relocatables because we might need them. Ultimately, I think we want to not need them. I know that's going to take a while, but I guess, and my next question is going to be about the air quality of some of them. So do we expect to be able to start offloading some of them? I guess I'd kind of like to know what the picture
Absolutely.
is.
That's the plan.
Yeah,
So
but
as soon as we're sure we won't need, as soon as we're sure we won't need, say, 6 next year, then we would start planning on auctioning those off to another school district.
If I may add also, there will be some discussion during the upcoming CIP process about the possibility of creating, for example, a temporary school or a swing space school so that we can do work at other schools. So I think we're trying to balance keeping a reasonable stock with not having to buy new ones when we don't need them, and for this year at least seeing what comes out of that CIP process and whether we are actually going to be looking at some sort of a swing space that would involve a substantial number of classrooms.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful, and I know we'll keep talking about that.
Yeah, I think in summary, it may be a better question for the Department of Planning and Evaluation when they look at their numbers and their forecasts, because at the moment this year we got the general impression that the only surplus ones that we're keeping for the sake of it for now were at Williamsburg and Swanson, plus a couple at Henry that we'll leave soon.
Yeah.
Sorry.
All right, and then another question on the relocatables then. I know that, and I will say this does not happen too often, but we do end up occasionally getting feedback from staff or parents that some of our relocatables occasionally have air quality, mold, different things like that. And I really appreciated your information, and I think that's great that most of what your work is based on your own inspections, less from, personal feedback, because then it becomes who's advocating more.
Yes.
It's better to have our own process and standard. But when those issues have come up, when we've heard about staff's concerns about, things like mold or air quality, they strike me as real concerns.
Sure.
And so I wonder, why are we not catching those? And again, is there a process
So let me answer that question. The majority of concern we've had has been at the beginning of the school year. And the relocatable classrooms are often not used during the summer or occupied, but they need to be conditioned, or those bad things do happen. So this spring, we issued a direction to custodians and to principals to make sure it happened, that all of those classrooms would be checked every weekday to make sure that there were no leaks, that the systems were working properly, there weren't drips, things weren't happening. And so this year we've had a lot less complaints or incidences of mold. There are some areas where we have it every year no matter what we do, and we do have an environmental specialist who goes in and takes care of it. We're doing some work at Barcroft over their break to replace some to replace carpet with floor tiles. Carpet can be an issue with mold. So I think we're on top of it, and it made a big difference this year having that quality control to make sure that nothing bad was happening in any of those spaces. And to extend that, we made sure it didn't just include relocatable classrooms, it included any spaces in the school that weren't being used regularly. Because the previous summer we'd had some issues where rooms that hadn't been used regularly, there was mold growth, and they weren't able to be used for some time after the beginning of school until they'd been cleaned up properly.
And to be fair, that's something that can happen in the relocatables, and it can happen in certain areas of the schools if they stay extremely quiet and there's a leak that's unfounded. I did want to tell you that we did basically get rid of all the older deteriorating relocatables through this process. You mentioned Barcroft, where basically they had a 10-plex that was our oldest in the system. That's completely gone. And what's there now is a newer one. When we shuffle things around, we learn stuff. We gave Barcroft what we thought was the nicest model since they were being upgraded, and it transpired it had carpets. It houses, for example, a very young kids program, and they're on the carpet all the time. So over time, a carpet's probably not practical there. So in the intercession at Barcroft, we're actually taking out the carpet from those rooms and replacing it with vinyl floor.
Right, and I appreciate that, and I know that you are working on the one that I had heard about at Barcroft. And then pulling that together, I guess my assumption would be going forward, when you do know there are certain relocatables that have those perpetual problems, because some of those problems don't really, they do come back. That I assume those are then the next likely relocatables to be
Absolutely,
offloaded.
they'll fall off the end, and we're mostly there with that, really.
I have, this is the topic I have the most questions on, so I have two other topics, but if you want to
Yes,
go around.
if you don't mind,
and
I'd like to
then-
do
and
the
I'd like
round and then come back to you.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, Mr. Goldstein, do you have questions?
I do, thank you. Just briefly, thank you, Jim, for the presentation. Could you go back to slide 9, please? So that was a very impressive slide. So I'm wondering if you have some more analysis or thoughts on this. So over 10 years, we're spending about $4 million more, right, than we did in 2008?
Approximately, yes.
And we're
It
getting...
came up more gradually than that, but yeah.
Yeah, but in 2018, we're spending $6.5 million, and 10 years before that, we were spending $2.5 million.
Yes.
But we've got only a quarter of the requests in 2018 that we did in 2008.
No, not a quarter of the requests. So I should explain that further. We got 800 requests because just about everything came in from schools. The system was set up that you went out and said, what would you like? What do you think you need? And there was a little bit of inspection in ours. Since then, we've had great developments on safety and security and all sorts of other things where we've got our own in-house staff doing evaluations. And then we've had consultants do the evaluations. The roofing program, we had a consultant go out and evaluate the 15 buildings with the oldest roofs, and they gave us an order of those. And we're about 12 roofs through that with 3 to go. So it was really, it doesn't mean we only had 200 things to consider. We might have had 500 things to consider, but most of them are coming directly from our own staff at the moment. When I say we get 200 requests, I should explain that probably 50% of those will disappear in the initial evaluation. There's a whole process we go through with committee, but many of them turn into work orders. Despite our instructions and our best efforts, some people will still come in and say, I need a door handle fixed for an MCMM. So we first go through and eliminate those. So what I'm saying, the 85% is really from the projects that really are projects and end up under consideration by the committee. About 85% is coming from our analysis, and the balance is coming from surviving requests from schools.
Okay, I think that answers my question. Yeah, about where the extra $4 million is coming from. You know, yeah, I think that answers my question. Thank you. Just to clarify something Barbara brought up, we have approximately 126 relocatables, but those are, we're counting 126 individual classroom
Those are classrooms, and to be honest, we have 2 or 3 now that are gymnasiums or surplus gymnasiums, what we call utility buildings, and we've stopped counting those as classrooms because it was confusing some of the calculations.
But if we go around the whole county and we start counting relocatable buildings,
right,
we're not going to get to 126 because we have 6 plexes and 8
so we
plexes.
have an 8, we have several 6s, we have a couple of 8s, and yeah, in fact.
But that number is individual classrooms,
individual
which
classrooms,
maybe
that's
lash
what we
together
count,
into a 6-plex or an 8-plex or a 4, something like that.
Yep.
Okay, thanks. And my last question is, as part of the HVAC renovation for Randolph, the installing light tubes were part of that, and that they didn't happen together in the summer.
It didn't because neither the roof or the light tubes happened at Randolph, so Randolph will be the next roof that we consider doing it, although we may give it 1 year back on the grid because it's been off the grid for 2 consecutive years. So we have about 3 roofs now that are due, and it will be one of those that we decide to do, and that will go into committee deliberations as well. But we haven't forgotten about the light tubes. So we didn't want to have all these people on the roof at the same time. The HVAC was proven complex. And so if we try and do the roof at the same time as the HVAC, it would be a disaster. And then even the light tubes have to do a little bit of roof work. And we don't want to give contractors excuses. And they often will use an excuse if there's 2 contractors trying to work on different projects simultaneously. So we deferred them, but the good news is they're going in right now. We're working at Randolph on, I think we have 12 light tubes. There'll be 2 each for 6 classrooms that were without natural light. So hopefully you can go over there and see a big difference early in November.
Okay, I just wanted to double check because I was told it would be about the end of October that they would be, it would be finished.
That's still the case.
So it is working.
Yeah.
All right, very good. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Goldstein. Mr. Grady, do you have any questions?
Yes, thank you, Chair Talento. Mr. Mickle, I was wondering on page 9, and we're still on it, there was some conversation about the amount of money that's been allocated between 2008 and how much more we're allocating now.
Yes.
Is a lot of this, does this mean that you're able to do more cyclic maintenance on time, and that's why you're...
Absolutely.
So because you have more money, you're able to do more cyclic maintenance, and then we don't have as many deferred maintenance issues, and so people have to ask less frequently for you to come in and do work because you can stay ahead of what
Right.
needs to happen.
And we've gone away from a full building at a time renovating, because that doesn't really work from where we are. We've basically got a component-based system. So a building might need a roof, but that's the only thing it needs right now. The gym is okay, the lighting is okay. Mm-hmm. Another building might need another component. So we're really on a component-based system.
As opposed to a building,
As a
going
whole
into,
building at a time. Yeah, I mean, that sounds good, but it would
building.
take us way too many years to get through that.
Okay.
And it wouldn't always be the real priorities.
I gotcha. So it's on an as-needed basis, system by system or whatever it is, and allows you to keep ahead. And so when you say here that less than 15% of your requests come in as requests, that could be for something that may not need maintenance. It could be a new need a school has.
Yeah, I mean, they might ask us for new HVAC in a school, and usually nowadays with the system as it is, we would probably already have picked that up. But occasionally the schools ask us for something and we've overlooked it. We go and look and think, wow, we'd never picked it up for some reason. You know, we've got 40 buildings, that can happen. What typically those might be smaller things, like in the last round we had a whole load of pebble sheds. Not a very exciting subject, but you know, we needed safe outdoor storage for gasoline and lawnmowers. So we went through a program of that. A lot of schools had asked for those too. So things like that.
Yeah, I noticed that at one of the schools that I visited. So I guess my main question is, if it's not on a maintenance request, but it might be on a need-based request because they have a particular need, how do you choose who gets the new thing that a school says it needs? And
right.
Should they expect to wait a year, 2 years?
So we have a 10-year plan. We don't send that plan out because the first 2 or 3 years have a lot of definitive names in it. But beyond that, it's ever-changing. We're reevaluating, just like we do with work on a daily basis, we're reevaluating the priorities all through. But the main thing is that MCMM committee, you see, will end up with a spreadsheet with, let's say, 150 potential projects. And that committee will go through and actually prioritize them till we reach a consensus on how they're prioritized, one through whatever it is.
Okay, so there's a process and everyone looks at all of the requests.
Absolutely.
And then they're prioritized. Okay.
When schools ask us, a lot of times we'll get questions, well, when am I getting my new field? Or we will generally say to them, okay, we can tell you that's definitely coming in the next year or two. You're maybe in the 3 to 5 year range, or you're beyond 5 years. That's the kind of general guidance we'll give. And we're not trying to be secretive, we're just trying to be practical.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Grady. Dr. Kennan?
Well, let me jump on this topic. Speaking of those lists, one of the things, while we've got a lot of these activities going on, one of the things that we haven't been able to do, like I think was going on a bit in the past, were the renovations of our oldest schools. I mean, we did just do that for Abingdon, but we had done Drew and Nottingham and Glebe, and then we started building new schools. So I just wanted to make sure that as you're developing this MCMM list, are we actually sort of cross-checking that with the fact that hopefully we will be getting back to complete renovations of some of our oldest schools, in which case you don't want to install a new roof.
No, so yeah, we're completely coordinated.
Tear it down and build a new school. So is that...
Our design and construction colleagues, Jeff's team, obviously they're deciding, right, we're going to put an addition somewhere. Usually they'll try and do a bit of renovation at the same time as they do an addition. So we're probably going to stay away from that at school. Unless we already had something on our radar that got funded, we might try and do it at the same time if it's practical.
I think I'm wondering about that radar, though, because, again, we haven't really developed that. Or is that list being developed, the schools that we might...
Additions, I think, will be part of the CIP, I guess.
So I think that we are doing a very good job of maintaining our buildings, but the issue that we face is that we're learning a lot from the new buildings and the renovations that we're doing, and that we really need to be applying what we've learned in the new buildings to the older buildings. While we're growing to the extent that we are, that is challenging to do because of the limited funds that we have available to do that. But we're beginning to think about that more and more as to how do we reconstitute that renewal program that we had up until about 2010 when we started to grow so rapidly. But at the same time, you'll notice from that difference between the 2.5 and the 6.5, we have done a lot of work to upgrade schools with really the basic needs, and they've been updated also with information services infrastructure and educational infrastructure. So I think we're probably not quite in the space that we were before. And I think in this coming CIP, we will be looking at a lot of options for additions to schools as well as new schools, because we have the sites where we can put additions and we have some fairly small schools. So I think we may be moving into that era when we're looking at updating some of our oldest and smallest schools in a bigger way than just necessary infrastructure. The other thing I would say is I want to give a shout out to Kathy Lynn, because she has focused very much on lighting installations in schools. And light is one of the biggest differences we can make in a school. And when you go into our schools, even some of the older schools that have had fluorescent replaced by LED, it immediately makes a difference. The schools feel brighter, they feel more alive, and that is making a really big difference.
Thank you.
Okay, good.
Okay. New topic, fields.
Fields.
So a couple of, and again, the Barrett installation of synthetic field really was made a difference at that school for their recess time. A couple of the fields I have seen lately that are in quite bad condition are Swanson and Glebe. There's usually some time of year that we get a list from you about what's forthcoming in terms of what's going to be addressed this year. And I'm wondering I would hope that if we have schools in the condition those fields are in, that they're coming up very soon. And if they're not, I think we need to discuss what we can do about that.
So let me address that one too. And as you know, we are preparing a list of potential CIP projects, and right in there is a list of field renovations, because you're absolutely right, we cannot, with the amount of use we get on those fields, the grass field is not working. And but that work is also coordinated with the county, particularly where we have joint use or heavily used fields by the county. Then we will be sharing the cost, and the two CIPs have to align.
Are you saying it's only fields that the county that are being
No.
used by county rec then?
No, I'm not only saying that. I'm saying that some of them are that way, and some of them we need to do by ourselves because the county doesn't use them to the extent that we do.
And we will see the list in the spring?
Yes, we will. We're including that in the proposed CIP projects.
So that means, and again, these are just two fields that I happen to have seen recently, Swanson and Glebe, are not happening this year, for example.
I don't
They're
think
not.
so.
So
No.
if I can talk to that, I mean, we talked with Parks and Rec before this summer, and they heavily use those two fields, and accept a lot of the responsibility for them being so worn. They were coming in the summer to do renovation in Swanson. It doesn't sound like you've noticed much difference.
To be fair, I know that you had the trailers at Swanson.
No, but they weren't on the field. So
Yeah.
the county came in over the summer and did reseeding and some work on Swanson Field to try and get us at least another year or two from it.
Okay.
But
the last time I saw Glebe, there was zero grass.
So they did the same at Glebe. I guess if you don't mind me following up through Mr. Chadwick, I'll get you an update on their status.
I just want to make sure that when fields are in that bad of condition, they're being addressed. And
Right.
and so you believe they are being addressed?
They were being addressed by the county to at least try and get them back usable. And Glebe is not a particularly old field. It was Bermuda, and we sprinkled it, and we've kind of learned that, you know, even with that in great care, the Bermuda is not holding up to the level of use. So we may have to go after more synthetic.
Yeah, they're reseeding to get something going, but I think the conclusion is for fields like that where they're really not able to thrive, we really have to convert
Dr. Cannon,
for the
if
longer
we,
run,
yeah.
but we're waiting for the CIP to do that piece.
If we had the funds, we would do all of them.
Yeah.
And what's happened with the two fields at elementary schools, which obviously are not shared with the county, we've been able to use a lesser specification than is needed for full athletic competition fields, which has cost a little less. But in all of those cases, it's a very expensive proposition because we have to do all sorts of stormwater management that you don't see. Well, you see it when it's going in, but when the field's in place, it's done. And we have actually, this year we collaborated with the county both at Barrett and Science Focus, and we worked with them to actually reduce the initial specification they were asking for to reduce the cost of the field installation somewhat.
So they are play fields, they're not sports fields,
Yes,
athletic
those fields, right,
and that's
understood.
deliberate. And we have a camera on them because they're attractive, and so we don't mind kids romping around in tennis shoes, but we don't want adults with cleats on them. So we keep a close eye on them to preserve them.
I just, as one board member, want to, really want to see these fields at all of our schools in the condition that we would be proud to have kids playing on them. So I'm worried about this and want to just make sure that when we get into the spring and talk about it, that we're
No.
It's
fully
on the
funding
list.
those needs. And I recognize we have a lot of needs, but that's something I would want to watch for.
You
Thank
still may see a field or two in MCMM. Just be aware there'll be some big stuff in the CIP, but you still may see a field or two in MCMM. There's at least 2 or 3 will be vying for MCMM money.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Kennan. Thank you, Mr. Meikle. We appreciate your presentation this evening, and thank you for all the information you shared.
Thank you very much.
We next have an action, we're next moving to the action part of our agenda item. Our action item tonight is the adoption of the internal audit plan for this school year. And I invite Mr. John Mikovice, who I forgot to note earlier, is also here this evening with us, and you're not always with us, so thank you for being here tonight to recap this action item. And if you could please summarize the plan for us so that we can then move forward with acting on it.
Thank you, Madam Chair. School board members, Ms. Johnson, executive leadership team, APS staff, and friends and members of the Arlington community. Essentially, we have 4 major projects proposed for fiscal year 20. First of all, looking at new school construction cost, following up with APS staff on 5 cost reduction suggestions, and making sure staff has done the work to get what the potential cost savings and efficiencies may be from those 5 suggestions. Second project is looking for any efficiencies, cost savings, or revenue opportunities, including looking at our planning factors versus how those are actually played out in actual expenditures in the year, looking at last year, looking at what's happening this year, and also looking at overtime expenses. Next, we'd be looking at employee expense reimbursement and controls and compliance with the approved policies, and also looking at the level of compliance with each of the English learner settle agreement requirements. There have been no changes since this was presented 2 weeks ago, and so this is really when it was presented for information. Are there any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Mikovice. We're going to actually see if we have any speakers on this item. Okay, excellent. Colleagues, do you have any questions or comments before we make a motion? Mr. Goldstein.
Thank you for the presentation, John, or the summary. On that first bullet,
yes.
5 cost reduction suggestions compared to potential cost savings and efficiencies. Can you elaborate a little bit? I'm not exactly sure what that means.
Many of the suggestions that were made by O'Connor Construction involve getting other types of outside consultants or resources in order to do the cost reduction. So I think staff would have to evaluate how much is it going to cost to do the extra work that's required versus what the potential savings would be before we would actually encounter that. In other words, there's a cost to doing the cost reduction.
I see. I see. So identify the cost reduction suggestion and then figure out what the cost of doing it and then the cost benefit is.
Exactly, because O'Connor made the suggestions But they weren't tasked with getting specific information to see how applicable that would be to our environment.
Okay, all right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, may I have a motion?
I have a motion, Madam Chair. I move that the board adopt the proposed internal audit plan for the 2019-2020 school year.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes 5-0. Thank you, Mr. McAvice, for being here
Welcome.
this evening. We really appreciate it, and great presentation, and we will see you again soon.
Thank you.
We have 5 information items tonight. First, we will hear an item on the children's school specialized improvement costs. Ms. Johnson?
Yes, I'd like to introduce Leslie Peterson, who'll do this presentation. Thank you.
Good evening. I am here tonight to talk about the children's school, the specialized improvement costs for their new location, and a funding recommendation. Just a little bit of background. As you know, the children's school is a private, nonprofit cooperative daycare program. It also partners with our Integration Station program to provide inclusion opportunities for those students. They have been partners of APS for a long time. Previously were located in one of our schools. As you know, we've needed our schools for our students, so they have relocated, to rental property currently on Fairfax Drive. They are in the process of building a new facility on Lee Highway, and the school board signed a services agreement with the children's school in March of 2019 to move with the children's school and co-locate Integration Station at that new facility. As part of that services agreement, TCS will move to the facility in July of 21 for 10 years. We will go with them, and Integration Station students will pay tuition for the spaces that they use at the children's school. We will work together to design the new space in the new building. And APS agreed to pay $280,000 towards the construction of the building because we need to raise the height of the first floor to accommodate the school buses that will be coming to drop off Integration Station students. And then we also agreed to pay $220,000 for the build-out of IS-specific spaces, where we need specific rooms and work in the room to accommodate our Integration Station students. TCS has requested payment of those 2 items that we outlined in the services agreement, and so I am coming to you with a recommendation that we transfer $500,000 from the capital reserve for payment of these 2 construction-related items, totaling $500,000 per the services agreement. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you,
This will
Ms.
be coming back for action, at the November 7th meeting.
Thank you, Ms. Peterson. Ms. Mercado, do we have any speakers? Okay. Colleagues, do you have any questions or comments? Mr. Goldstein?
Thank you. Thank you, Leslie. Can you go back to slide 3, please? And the second bullet there, second sub-bullet. Can you remind me of the tuition arrangement of that we're paying for TCS?
Sure. We pay tuition for the Integration Station students that attend the TCS program, just as any other student might. They do charge us only 75% of the going rate, and that is equivalent to about, I think it's about $51,000 a month for those students.
And how many Integration Station spaces or students are there?
Oh, yeah. I don't know off the top of my head, I'm sorry.
But but the rest of the students at TCS, the non-Integration Station students, I mean, those families are responsible for their own
Right, they attend TCS, they pay their own tuition. So we're de facto attending TCS with our students, and we're paying for our students to go there.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Any other questions or comments? And I just want to clarify that our students that attend there, we're required by law to provide them public education, the integration.
They're
station.
special education students, and this is, we provide them with inclusion opportunities, and this was a very good way for us to provide those inclusion opportunities for those students. Right. Since we don't have a program in-house, for those inclusion opportunities.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. So hearing no other questions, we'll move on to the next item, and thank you again for presenting. Next, we will hear the Career Center expansion educational specifications. Ms. Johnson, would you please introduce the staff?
I'd like to turn it over to Mr. Chadwick.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. I'm asking Jeff Chambers, Director of Design and Construction, our wonderful principal from the Career Center, Margaret Chung, and Dirk Jeffrey, our architect, are going to do this presentation together. They've been a team all the way through and will be for many years to come.
Thank you, John. Good evening, everyone. What we're going to be talking about in this presentation is we're going to be doing a project overview to refresh everyone's mind on what the project is. The educational specifications, or ed specs, providing an overview of that and what they are and how they work and what we use them for. Site-specific ed specs, specifically for the Arlington Career Center expansion, development process, and proposed ed specs, and then talk about the next steps for the project. So for the project overview, if you recall, there are two projects included in the 2019-28 Capital Improvement Plan, the CIP. The Career Center at Arlington Tech to expand the capacity of Arlington Tech to 600 students is part of the work, as well as the Career Center project, which includes field and parking garage in 2023 and the 800-seat addition in the performing arts in 2025. Whoop. Also, just everybody wants to keep in mind that we do on the website, the APS website, under Design and Construction, under the Arlington Career Center, there is always an update of where we are on the project so everybody can follow along as we get to know each other better over the years. One of the things that we've started to work with is, this is the charge for the BLPC charge. We've taken the 16-page charge and put it on one sheet. Really haven't, but this is just the reminders, and we bring this up with all the BLPC members and all the meetings, and we keep this in mind. But the project overview is 800 seats for the Arlington Career Center option program, expansion of Arlington Tech to 600 seats, having a high school size gymnasium and assembly space, performing arts center, which includes a theater, black box, and music classrooms, cafeteria, multi-use space, multi-use outdoor synthetic turf field, parking, garage essentially below grade or other scenarios as we work through the process. Columbia Pike Library is to remain in place throughout the process until they choose to relocate, should they do that. Replacement, enhancement, and expansion of all the facilities for the Career Center and for the CTE program, as well as the Arlington Tech and other programs in the building, and also to plan for future phases and expansion to allow as many different options as possible for phasing as we work through the process. We have a project schedule that we've shared before, but we have essentially superimposed, if you notice, Q3, we have 2 months of summer projects that we do as part of this work with regard to maintaining the programs that are in the building until we get to the major portion of the project. But we are currently working towards schematic review concept review with the BLPC PFRC process by the end of March, so that we have that information for the CIP. Then we'll move into schematic design, design development, construction documents and bidding, and then we will have phase 1 currently as identified in the CIP is the parking facility to be done by 2023, and then the construction of the school portion to be completed by the fall of 2025. With regard to the ed specs themselves, just an overview of what the ed specs are. Educational specifications, or ed specs, provide the criteria for the project. So essentially, this is what the project will be judged by as we look back and make sure that we've provided all of the spaces, everything that needs to be provided in the building for all of the programs that are going to be under the impact of this facility. So its planning parameters are set, framework for expansion, square footages and allocations for program spaces. What are the space types? What's provided in the building? What educational programs are we putting in the facility? And what spaces are we providing to make sure they can be accommodated? And then principles of school planning and design. APS does have ed specs. Division-wide ed specs were developed in 2004. We found with all of the changes in technology and the changes in teaching and learning and the direction that we're going and the options programs, et cetera, we find that doing site-specific ed specs, utilizing that as the base and building upon that each time gives us a better result for the project. So we're not building a school that's 15 years old by using older ed specs. So we're trying to update and work through that. For these site-specific ed specs, I think that the main thing is at a minimum we include a schedule of program spaces required for with the required square footage allocation. So we look at what happens in each of these spaces, how big does it need to be, and what spaces are provided in the building. We also look at non-standard programs and spaces with a site-specific ed spec, so it's not just a generic classroom. We're looking at what exactly has to happen within this facility, also building in agility and adaptability for the future of things that may or may not be known. We also are looking at developing the ed specs concurrent with the concept design, so that we make sure that we have that information as we're going through into the concept design so that the people that are involved in the BLPC and PFRC know what's going to be within the building, so that that helps them look at the things that they're supposed to look at with regard to how it ties into the community. And then the other thing is the criteria does form the baseline for what we're doing. So this is very important. This defines what we are doing as part of the project. And at this point, I'll turn it over to, I did want to do one other thing. Before I did that is I just do want to acknowledge with regard to who is involved in the ed specs. It's not something design and construction does. We have a lot of input. We are involved with it. But I think with Arlington Career Center, Margaret has been very involved in the creating the ed specs, along with Mr. Eric Healy, the assistant principal, and Jessica Baker, the other assistant principal there. Bridget Loft was involved, Yorktown High School principal, to provide that perspective. We also had Chris Martini, director of Career and Technical Adult Education, Tyrone Bird, secondary education, Heather Hurley, supervisor, personalized learning, and then from facilities and operations and design and construction, John has been very involved with that. Myself, Benjamin Bergen, the assistant director, and Steve Stricker, the senior project manager. In addition, very instrumental in providing us the information we needed is Deb DeFranco, supervisor of health, physical, and driver education and athletics, has been very involved. Pam Farrell, arts education, and Jeff Luttrell, library services, as well as Helena Macchiato with aquatic services, so that we get all of that perspective and all of that information. So I'm going to turn it over to people that are really working hard on this. Margaret?
Thank you, Jeff. Good evening, Ms. Johnson, Board Chair Tanya Talento, members of our school board, and ELT. Thank you for this opportunity to share our ed specs. It's an incredible time. It's been a long journey to get here, and I'm truly appreciative of all your support throughout this process. I'm especially grateful to our staff, our students, and our parents who have truly journeyed with us throughout this process, and continue to realize our transformation. We've landed in a different place. than we were 5-6 years ago, and it's exciting to realize the future ahead of us. I'm grateful to the detail staff, facilities, Stantec, for the many hours of grappling with the complexities, both qualitative and quantitative, of our unique programs at Arlington Career Center. I'm proud to say that the EdSpecs captures our priorities as a school district to provide meaningful, personalized learning for our students, and ACC's focus on PBL, project-based learning, and work-based learning opportunities. The EdSpecs enhance our current programs and are adaptable to future instructional changes. What became clear through the process of developing the EdSpecs was that we were building upon the foundational principles of the Arlington Career Center. We are foremost a united community of learners anchored by work-based learning for not only our full-time students, but for students across the district and including our adult education learning community. ACC connects our learners, businesses, and higher ed partners. We are connected by our common purpose to serve our community through authentic learning experiences and a culture that embraces and unites our diverse community. ACC has undergone and continues to transform from the inside out. We are adaptable, responsive, and understand that change is our reality. We love our multifunctional and community-oriented learning spaces and look forward to having these types of spaces define our campus. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Margaret. Good evening, Superintendent Johnson and members of the board. Thank you for this opportunity to be with you tonight to share with you the work of the EdSpec committee. The members of the committee have already been recognized by Mr. Chambers, but if I might also add thanks on behalf of my colleagues from Stantec Architecture for the support that we received, the guidance throughout the process to develop and to clarify all of the information that is in the EdSpec document that you have before you. It's been a privilege for us at Stantec to be part of the work at the Career Center and to have worked with such a committed and fun group of experts from APS, hardworking, good-natured people we get along with very well. But the EdSpecs that you have before you is the product of that collaboration, and we hope that it's a fair reflection of the committee's voice and vision for learning at the Career Center as we go forward. So you might think of the EdSpec simply as a summary of the facility requirements needed to support the learning process, including particular learning experiences and outcomes. And as you know, that changes from project to project. EdSpecs, as Margaret mentioned, tend to be partly quantitative to account for all of the space, the number and the size and the type of space, and partly qualitative to account for the things that make those spaces work better for people, types of things that we can do through design so that you can build community and keep people connected and adapt to change over time and support the type of culture that you have at the Career Center. This slide summarizes the planned enrollments in the various programs at the Career Center in year 2025, including Arlington Tech, matured at 600 students, the additional 800 high school seats, instructional program to be determined. CTE will continue at its current level of enrollment at 300 students, and other all-day programs, Academic Academy, English Learners, and PEP contribute another 200 students, such that we will have 1,900 students at the Career Center in year 2025. So 2 points to make. For the purposes of developing the EdSpec, space requirements for the additional 800 seats, the space requirements assume that those would be similar to Arlington Tech. And with respect to the 300 CTE students, please remember that that is only a third. That is 3 times each day the Career Center receives approximately 300 students from other neighborhood schools. So they actually serve 900 students from across the county every day, and that will continue. This slide is a roll-up of all of the teaching spaces that are in the ed specs that may be scheduled for instruction and contribute to overall capacity calculations. So a total of 122 teaching stations are calculated to serve a capacity of 2,194 students. 122 teaching spaces is about twice what exists currently at the Career Center in terms of teaching stations. This graphic also illustrates the various teacher-to-student ratios that exist among various types of spaces and programs. For example, special needs programs, PEP, are 1 to 10, academic academy and English language is 1 to 15, CTE typically 1 to 20, Arlington Tech and other academic spaces 1 to 24, for example. Those spaces are then factored at 85% to allow space for growth and latitude in scheduling, since it is operationally unrealistic to fill every seat in every space every period of the day. So that 85% allows some latitude in those areas. The methodology that the committee followed to calculate capacity began with the Career Center administrators projecting the number of sections or classes required in every course and every program at that future planned level of enrollment. And from the number of sections, we arrive at the number of teaching stations by dividing them by the 8 instructional periods across the AB block schedule. And for each station, we then multiply by that teacher-student ratio and apply that utilization factor, and that's how we arrived at the capacity. The next several slides highlight the space program, so just very quickly, approximately 156,000 square feet or so is needed for all academic spaces, including classrooms, labs, collaborative learning, and teacher planning spaces. 156,000 square feet is about the size of the existing Career Center, not including the Columbia Pike Branch Library. So if you can imagine every square inch of space dedicated to academic space would be about what we would need. The ed specs also include a 500-seat auditorium, a black box theater, art labs, a choir room, band room, practice rooms. None of these spaces exist at the Career Center today. Also a full-size gymnasium with spectator seating for 1,500, an auxiliary gymnasium, locker rooms, health rooms, as well as a fitness room. A school library, also not at the Career Center today, as well as an expanded food service operation and student dining. Of course, space for offices, conference rooms, counseling and health suites, space for mechanical, electrical, digital equipment and infrastructure, and space for the Teen Parenting Center. Altogether, the ed specs outline a total facility requirement of approximately 370,000 square feet, of which approximately 157,000 square feet already exists. So additions of over 200,000 square feet are needed. You'll notice that the ed spec for the ACC expansion compares favorably to other APS neighborhood high schools in terms of gross area, capacity, and square foot per student. In the appendix of the ed specs, we also introduced the design strategy of space types, which helps us to envision how programmed spaces may be leveraged for a variety of uses and designed for flexibility. This is an example of an academic space that illustrates a variety of settings within a single space, including ideas about visual transparency and storage, relationship to the main circulation, and so forth. The last two images suggest ideas for making a performance space as flexible as possible, including both a traditional stage as well as an arena-type performance space. to smaller informal rehearsal spaces and even perhaps a runway for your fashion students. And many more examples of other types of spaces are also included in the ed spec.
Which leads us to the next steps. Where are we going with this? Essentially, what we're looking for or hoping for is that the November 7th school board meeting, the board would take action. In November to February of 2020, the concept design phase with the BLPC, PFRC would be continuing and ongoing. And we would expect as we do that to refine the ed specs as we have discussions and work through the options, which we would then come to the board in March of 2020 for the school board with information and action on the concept design, which would be, again, based on this ed spec that we're bringing to you tonight. And then in June 25th of 2020, we would expect that whatever we've come up with will be included in the 2021 to 30 CIP. So at this point, any questions that anyone has? That's the end of the formal presentation. Oops. With the recommendation we would hope to receive of to approve the Arlington Career Center Educational Specifications document, which is attached. It is online. Anybody that wants to look at the actual ed spec, it is already documented and attached with this. And also to direct the staff to provide an update on the ed specs, highlighting any refinements made during the conceptual design, and bring that to you in March of 2020.
Thank you for the
now questions. Sorry.
Thank you for the presentation. A lot of information, and so we're grateful for that. Do we have any speakers?
Yes, we have one speaker, Sarah McKinley.
Thank you. I was part of the Career Center Working Group representing Columbia Heights Civic Association, and the reason I'm here today, I will tell you that I was very disappointed with the final report of the Career Center Working Group. I felt that in subtle and not so subtle ways, it did not reflect the will of the majority of people on that, and I went to every single meeting. But I want to focus tonight on just one aspect, and that's parking. Now, the plan that was presented to us during the Career Center Working Group was an underground parking garage that would hold 500 cars. And I can tell you that the three main civic neighborhoods that were represented, and that was Columbia Heights, Penrose, and Arlington Heights. Our major concern with that parking lot was that it wasn't big enough. That those 500 seats, we were told, would serve the teaching staff and the staff of the high school as it was going to be built out. But it would not accommodate, this is very significant, it would not accommodate students who would be driving to school. Keep in mind, this is a teaching facility that's a work study, so that all the seniors would be required to have internships, and most of those kids would be working after school. A lot of those kids would need cars. It would not accommodate cars for the community high school, which are all adults going back to school to try to get their college or their high school diploma. They're all working people. They get there by car. Wouldn't accommodate them. It would not accommodate any parking for the library. These are critical elements to this, and we were promised that we would not have cars pushed out into the neighborhoods.
Thank you so much for your comments. We appreciate you being here this evening.
I can only tell you that we are united in being opposed to pushing out.
Thank you for your comments. Thank you, sir. We appreciate you being here. Thank you. Colleagues, do you have any comments or questions regarding the presentation? Okay. Ms. Van Doorn?
Good evening. I'm not
so uncomfortable with this, Solomon, I'm talking to you. Excuse me, I feel like I'm being rude. Ms. Johnson, I'm going to direct these to you because I don't know who is going to answer the questions, and I prefer you to direct who they go to. So my first question is, I'm very concerned about making sure that we replace the space that we are taking down in order to build this new facility, because it is the studio space and the workshop space. So I want to know, are we replacing it foot by foot, square by square, centimeter by centimeter? How is that planning happening, and who's involved in that? I hear who your team is, but I don't hear people from the AV studio or from the shop studio. I don't hear them involved in that. So I want to know, because that's one of those things that keeps sort of sliding off the table. And I would hate to hear that we're sort of presuming it's going to be a much smaller space that's multi-use, that doesn't serve the needs of the people who are actually teaching those classes. So whoever, Ms. Johnson, is the appropriate person to give me that assurance, I'd like to hear it.
I'm going to answer that question, if I may.
Yeah, and I'm going to defer to you, Mr. Chadwick, to direct the responses.
I want to make it clear that the team has been directed that all of those spaces must be replaced in kind or in whatever will be updated from them. And so you will find, when you look in detail through those ed specs, that all of those spaces are there. And the intent is that when the building is finished, all those spaces will be provided, maybe not in the same place, but in new places.
Okay, Ms. Johnson, have the faculty who need to actually use that space been involved in that planning?
I will answer that one too. Ms. Van Dorn, we are at a very early stage of the project. We are developing the overall space requirements. As we get into more detail, the detailed requirements for those spaces will be developed, and some of them will be developed through the design process itself, because many of these spaces are spaces that aren't normally provided in high schools. And the staff will, of course, be included in that. When we presented the ed specs on, was it Tuesday evening? Yes, Tuesday evening. Some of the staff were there. They asked exactly the question you asked, and they were very pleased and excited to learn that they would be provided, in many cases, with better spaces than they're now working in.
Okay, I'm going to want assurance before I vote on this, that faculty members who are going to need to use that space feel that the space allocated to them will be sufficient. I understand that they'll be involved in the design further on, but right now we're allocating the amount of space we need for those areas. And I'm very concerned about that because they're areas that continuously slip off our plate.
We will make sure that that happens before the next meeting. We'll work with Ms. Chung and her staff to make that happen.
I'm one board member. I'm raising my concern because I think we keep obviating away from those. So my second question is, are we, Ms. Johnson, incorporating the concepts of universal design in all of our work in this building?
I will address that one too. Yes, it was addressed in quite a bit of detail at the meeting on Tuesday evening. And as we've said before, universal design is not prescriptive, so we will be continuing to push the envelope with what that means to make our facilities as seamless as possible for people with all manners of abilities and disabilities.
I have one more question. I get four, so I have one more.
Ms. Van Dorn, I appreciate, but the way I've been doing it with everyone else, and I just want to be fair, is that even though they ask a question, if they're follow-up questions, I do count those, even if it's one topic.
I just asked two questions.
Okay.
Okay,
No,
please come back to me. I have another question.
Yes,
Thank
I
you.
plan to come back to everyone in the second round. Do you have any questions, Dr. Cannon?
Yes, sure. Thank you very much. I have the privilege of being the school board liaison to this project. I look forward to spending years with you. And of course, also want to acknowledge the chair of the Career Center BLPC is here this evening, Ted Black. Good to see you. Thanks for coming out. So I had two pretty quick questions, I think. They're on slides 14 and then 15. So let's do 14. This is pretty simple, and Ms. Stengel is not here. I just want to make triple sure from the planning perspective, because we're also doing our high school projections and making sure when we go into the CIP that we're building a certain number of seats and are we accommodating our growth. I want to make sure that planning and evaluation is using this number for the Career Center, and recognizing that the 300 are comprehensive high school students, I just want to make sure that we are matching up our plans for this project with what planning and evaluation believes the numbers are for the project. So when we go into talking about how many high school seats we need, you guys are doing, planning and evaluation knows exactly what you're actually doing.
Yes, I can assure you that there have been many, many discussions between the two departments to make sure that we are all understanding things the same way and that those numbers are included in the projection of seat needs in future years.
So these are the numbers then that, and again, however you're dealing with the comprehensive high school students, I know you
That
just want
makes
to make
it-
sure you're not double counting anything.
There's
of course.
been a lot of discussion about that too. Essentially, they have 1 1/3 seats.
Yeah, yeah. And again, as long as they're counted in one place and not the other. And then my next question is on slide 15. And I just would like, let's take the visual performing arts lines, 2 labs, choir band. And labs, I assume, under this item are referring to art studios of some, that's, when you say lab, it's the Career Center has a variety of programs. They're different, as Ms. Chung described. Arlington Tech is a different curriculum. Are these numbers consistent with what a comprehensive high school would have? Or how did you decide what the numbers should be, for example, for visual and performing arts?
This is where we use the expertise of Pam Farrell. She was involved in the discussion and how many spaces we needed for the size of the building, et cetera. So yes, this was specifically through teaching and learning.
Okay, and then, I mean, so basically you're saying it's like any high school would have.
That's correct.
So we're not.
The program may be slightly different, and it may be run differently with regard to, the background and the way Arlington Tech works. It may be a different art program, per se. They may do different things than you do in a typical comprehensive high school, but the space will be provided so that the program can grow and evolve the way Arlington Tech wants to teach art or has the art program.
So the idea being there are approximately 2,000 students in this building. There's approximately the same capacity for art classes as there is for that number of students in a comprehensive high school.
That's correct.
And then similarly for PE and probably more technical than comprehensive high schools, but across the board, that's how this is being figured out. It's basically what comprehensive high schools would have for some of these areas.
To allow the scheduling the same way it's scheduled in a comprehensive high school.
That leads right to your question on pools. Why don't?
Thank you.
Thank you.
May I just offer one clarification? In speaking about the performing arts instructional spaces, I believe Yorktown has an orchestra room as well. And so there was choir, band, orchestra in some of your comprehensive high schools. It was agreed or discussed, determined not to include the orchestra room in this ed spec at this population of students. So that was a discussion and a decision. I'm sorry, is that Pam?
Mm-hmm.
To not include that. And then on the PE side, we don't have a wrestling room, for example, but we do have a fitness room, 2 health rooms, again, at that population. So there was a discussion, that decision not to include some spaces that other neighborhood high schools would have.
Thank you.
Ms. O'Grady?
Thank you, Chair Talento. I have a question about slide 25, please. Slide 25 basically shows that in the end, we're actually building a high school that can hold similar number of seats as to all of our other comprehensive high schools. The one thing that's different in this ed spec in the long document is that there is space being held for a pool, but not plans to build a pool. Can you talk a little bit about the plan to hold a space for a pool? One of the things that was not addressed in the ed spec is how much it might cost to build a pool, even though currently we don't have money in the CIP set aside to do that. I'm interested in the idea of how you hold a space, and if eventually we're interested in putting a pool there, because all the other schools that of equivalent size do have a pool, how you would go about doing that, and if it would, what the cost would be, and just that kind of thing.
I think as far as cost goes, at this point in time, we really don't have an idea because we don't know what it's going to be built with. Is there going to be something over it, under it? You know, so coming up, and we haven't done a pool in recent history. I mean, current dollars, current economy. So I would give you a number and somebody would quote that to me in 5, 10, 15 years when we did the pool and it wasn't that number. So I would be basically guessing at this point in time without knowing materials and quality and type of pool and size and all of that. Now, what we've done in the specification is we've created or worked with our aquatics, director of aquatics, to come up with what should be the spaces that are provided. So the way we work with that is we know the approximate square footage. So as we are planning and master planning the site, the architect will say, we need this for a pool. We know how heavy a pool is. We know, where it may want to go as we master plan the site. It's very normal in school development or doing or planning for the future to take a pool or a huge competition gym or some other space like that and plan for it, but you don't build it right now or have necessarily the cost. You just know the square footage, you know the qualifications or the requirements or structural requirements. Should it be on the ground? Should it be underground? Could it be on the top of the building? Or, what are the implications and ramifications of that? But I've worked over 34 years in doing schools where I have high school floor plans that have a dotted line of a square footage included on the plan somewhere that says future potential pool. And it could be built as a pool someday, or it could become more academic space maybe. It depends what future people decide to do. But our whole goal with this site is to make sure that we master plan it for the future so we can put some of these things there. And it was one of the things that came out of the Career Center Working Group that was very much desired, but at this point, we don't have the dollars necessarily allocated for it. It's not an inexpensive venture, and it's not an inexpensive long-term maintenance and/or operations cost to the project.
Thank you, Mr. Chambers. I just wanted to ask about that because it did not appear in the presentation. So I wanted to, first off, have an understanding if it was going to continue to be something that you hold space for, and also acknowledge that that's one of the pieces that is missing when you look at things that are comparative from school to school to school, even though I do understand that this is a school that has very special opportunities for our students. It is one amenity that as we continue to grow, I want to keep in mind so that we don't, our student body doesn't grow so much that the current pool space that we have cannot accommodate our students. So thank you.
Mr. Goldstein?
Thank you. By happy coincidence, we're already on the slide that I have a question on. I'm looking at the gross square feet per student number for the Career Center expansion. I really am looking at the building capacity. And how is that 2194 calculated? Because, adding up the number of students at the Career Center is always kind of a complicated game.
Of course I missed
This is the right here. So again, the ed spec has a much more detail than this slide. But in the ed spec, you'll notice the column in the program schedule, which ones are teaching stations. And these are the ones in working with staff that they believed would schedule students into those spaces. Some spaces are support spaces, like a lab is not a teaching station, but the classroom attached to that lab is. So 2 spaces make 1 teaching station in that instance. So we were very careful to account for the teaching stations against the instructional program across all programs. those spaces, those types of spaces are shown here. So some of them are academic spaces, some of them are technical spaces, athletic and PE spaces, and arts spaces. Some of those spaces, some of those programs are occupied at different levels. That's the TSR, that's that teacher-student ratio column. That is the column then to which we applied this utilization factor of 85%. And so when that many stations at that level of occupancy, at a factor occupant level of 85% is the number on the right side. And that is just a straight addition of all of those stations at all those levels of occupancy that is in the ed spec. That's how it's arrived.
That's the capacity.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so if you go to the previous slide, 14, that says...
So it's a good question. This is some confusion at the BLPC, actually. So the enrollments that are planned in the charge, the 600 Arlington Tech students and the 800 additional high school seats by 2025, to all of the other students that are there today, the 300 CTE and the other 200 all-day students, that is how you arrive at the 1,900. So there is some additional capacity beyond what is planned to be enrolled in 2025.
Approximately 300
Yes, sir.
more seats.
Yes, sir.
Additional capacity.
Yes, sir.
Than what we're planning for in whatever year that is, that we're going to achieve that.
I believe
2025? No, sooner than that.
Arlington Tech is meant to be at 600 by 2021. I believe it's 2021, and then...
and the 800 by
yes, sir.
2025.
Yes,
Yeah,
sir.
okay, so by
Correct.
2025. All right, so I guess my question was, if you go to the 2194 again, that doesn't presume all of the day students in the building at the same time.
Correct.
Right?
Correct.
Okay, that presumes
300.
300, okay. The maximum number of students who you would actually see in the building at the same time. Okay,
Yes, sir. That's correct.
okay. All right, thank you. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. I did have a question, and it's actually on this slide. I just wanted to confirm that, I know you were saying these were based on ed specs on our other high schools, but I noticed that under technical, you have CTE labs and CTE classrooms. Those are additional, like other comprehensive high schools don't have as many of those. Is that correct? Yes?
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, so that does account for like the auto tech lab, the cosmetology lab, and so that's where that is included, is in the technical CTE labs, CTE classrooms. So if someone were to compare these specs to another high school, they would really just be looking at the academic section, the athletics, and then the visual performing arts, with the caveat that in the visual performing arts, there was an intentional choice to not include the orchestra room and an intentional choice to not include a wrestling room. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, great. Thank you. And then I think it was slide 25. Yeah. Okay. So it's a very similar question. I just want to make sure it's all reflected correctly. The gross square footage per student at 169 does account for the labs that we're using for our CTE classes,
Yes.
with the recognition that those labs, while taking more space, will not accommodate as many students. Okay, that's what I thought. I just wanted to confirm that as I was looking at numbers. So those are the questions that I have, and thank you so much, and I'm so glad we were able to include the breakdown of all the students that are at the Career Center. It's a wonderful place, and I was excited to see everyone being included in that, including our comprehensive students coming in. So maybe with the additional capacity, we can grow those options for comprehensive students. Ms. Van Doren, you had additional questions? Please.
Thank you. So I want to couch this first by saying that I am passionate about CTE classes, and I'm passionate about all of our students in Arlington as we go forward, having the opportunity to experience those as needed. I think that is how we are going to learn in the future. If you read any book about what the future market tells you anyone has to be learning some of these skills in order to be employed in the future. So that said, I'm disappointed in some of the trends that I see in our Arlington Tech program, in that it's narrowing options for students rather than expanding options, in that it's not capitalizing on all of the CTE programs. But that will be a conversation for a different day. I'm just putting that stake in the sand right now that I'm very worried about that. That said, now I'm going to go back to my comment on slide 14. I'm going to ask my colleagues for support on this change, because it's something that we keep talking about and we bring up in our ASAP. We brought it up last year and we bring it up again and again and again. We cannot have a flat level of CTE spaces every single year. I just went and looked in the ASAP, and every single year for the next 10 years it says 300 students, which is 900 students every year. So by my calculation, that means that this year we have 12% of our students at the high school level. We have 7,527 students. We have 900 students allocated for CTE, which is 12%. In 2025, we will have 9,366 high school students with 900 students allocated for CTE, which is only 9%, which by my calculation means that we should be adding 200 seats for the growth, just the standard growth of our school system. So if we are not going to increase the number of CTE students in the Career Center in 2025, that means what happened last year with culinary arts, I'm bringing it back home, will begin to happen again, because as the Arlington Tech students use the CTE classes, the ones they're allowed to use, and there are more students in the high schools, there will be fewer and fewer options for accessing those CTE seats. So I think right now we have to fix this. We have got to say, what is the percentage? What do we believe the percentage is going to be? And then we should add those seats. In my estimation, my crude calculation right now, that number should be 200 higher and the total should be 2,100, because that allows the number of students proportionately now who are using the CTE classes on a daily basis can continue to do that without having an annual scream here at the board that kids didn't have that opportunity, when we know those are exactly the kind of project-based learning opportunities all of our students need for the future labor market. So I would really like my colleagues to join me in asking that we revisit that number, and I think we should be increasing that number, and I've been saying it now for 2 years. So I would like some follow-up on that, and I'm going to be looking for that to get addressed between now and the next meeting. And my calculation, I just crudely did that right now. I'm happy to revisit it, but that number is consistently flat, and it has to change.
May I make a comment to that? If you, just a few minutes ago, the team spoke about one way of calculating the building capacity of the programs, giving you a total of 1,900, which was broken down clearly on that slide. When we look at it another way, we actually get almost 2,200 students. And so that actually provides us with the agility to increase those programs or other programs. You've always made it very clear, and I completely agree with this, that we have to design buildings that are adaptable and agile. So we have built in some flexibility there. And if you could go to the slide that compares the high schools, I found it very interesting when I looked at this. I asked for that comparison because I wanted to check where we were against the other high schools. Now, allowing for the fact that some programs from the high schools, like you mentioned, a couple of rooms that would not be included at the Career Center. And we know that some of the studio spaces and some of the CTE spaces are quite a bit larger than regular classrooms. Whereas the other high schools have swimming pools, I think they're somewhere from 13 to 15,000 square feet. So having them balanced out is pretty good. But in fact, if you also recall that over the last 3 years, we've done renovation projects at the high schools to increase the capacity actually from around 1,900 to around 2,200. And in this school, we've actually, or in these ed specs, we're applying all of those lessons we learned about how to do that. So we actually are trying to make this not as tight fit to the specific number that's been given all along, but to give us some room to expand those programs as we move forward.
All right, I'm going to follow up with my comment here, and that is that if that number stays flat at 300, what happens is at the operational level, the guidance counselors at each of the schools are told that's the number, and that's what they plan for. If we don't increase that number, we can have all the space we want, but if we continue to plan for only 300 CTE classes, 900, that's what's going to happen. So I think we need to recognize that that number has to increase with the growth of our student body, and I think it has to be reflected, or we're going to constantly have an increase in pressure on those classes from the comprehensive high schools. And I don't think just hoping it's going to work is good enough. I think it has to be reflected in those numbers.
Thank you, Ms. Van Doren. Are there any additional comments to that before I go on to board members? Oh, I just wanted, I wasn't sure if you wanted to comment on that.
I wanted to maybe offer one bit of clarification that's, it doesn't jump out at you. The footnote number 1, where the ed spec space requirements for those additional 800 seats are assuming as if all 800 students were Arlington Tech. That comes with it an extra burden for CTE. So when you go to this slide, the CTE labs in the classrooms, if you add all of those teaching stations together, those 44 CTE spaces is double what they have today in terms of CTE space. So we feel that depending on what your decision is in the future about programs for those 800 students, if we were to build this, there is space for all 800 students to have some CTE program. So I wanted to make sure, just let you know that.
Thank you. Dr. Kennanen?
Yeah. I think we were saying something, I was going to say something very similar to what you're saying. My understanding is that we left those 800 seats undefined, but clarified that they will be for Career Center programs. So in other words, they're not 800 Arlington Tech seats. They are 800 seats, some of which could easily be to accommodate those 300 or 900, however we're thinking about it, part-time students. The number is just 800 seats. Whether that's something that we have yet to define. We actually specifically put that in for this very reason. The idea is to accommodate a number of students. So, and I think that's what you were also saying, that there are a lot of CTE labs and classrooms being built into this. Whether they are Arlington Tech students or part-time students is something that will be defined as we get closer to that time. That's what we discussed. Is that consistent with what your expectation of our BLPC charge was? And I could ask the chair if he also thinks that's what we think it is.
I think so, yes.
Thank you, Dr. Kennanen. Ms. O'Grady?
Thank you. I think the question I was going to ask may have already been answered, which is, are the facilities going to be available for more students who want to come for those CTE classes? So I think this year we reached a maximum of students who could participate in a few classes because we had limited space. But is it planned that we will be increasing the space as our student population grows to accommodate our comprehensive students? I think I got the answer, but please, Ms. Chung.
So although initially, based on the initial request, it seemed that some of the CT classes had filled up. After adjusting some of the schedules, we were actually able to accommodate all the requests. So my understanding from the homeschools feedback is that we did not actually deny any homeschool students from actually coming to the Career Center for their CTE classes this year. And going forward, what we've realized as Arlington Tech has grown and the way we've designed the program, all the freshman CTE classes that we've designed are engineering, which is offered at the homeschools, computer science, which is offered at the homeschools, robotics, which is a type of engineering lab, and entrepreneurship, which is also offered at the homeschools. So we were very intentional about the courses that are open to the freshmen only. And those are offered during second period, so when the CTE students do not come from the high schools. Likewise, our seniors, because of the work-based learning in the afternoon, they take primarily academic courses, and then they leave to go to their work sites. So they're actually not really taking up CTE seats. So it's primarily just our sophomores and juniors, our full-time students in Arlington Tech, and our other full-time program students that are taking up in our programs that would be taking up the CTE seats. So we're finding that it's not as what we thought in terms of, so there is capacity currently. And so when we compared the number of students that took CTE last year from the homeschools to this year, it's very similar.
Thank you. And I just want to say, I do think that as we continue to grow, we need to be thinking about how to proportionally grow our opportunities for students or potential students, whether it's pre-K or CTE or pool space or whatever it is. I think it's important that we think holistically that, you know, not just what we need out of one particular space for the students who are in that space, but how that space could be utilized in the future and who we're leaving behind if we don't think more holistically about our growth and not just particular what we need for people who are in that site. So I appreciate Ms. Van Doren's concerns regarding that on this issue, but on other issues as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Grady. Mr. Goldstein, do you have a last round of questions?
Not a question, but a thought on this most recent conversation, and that is, while I agree that we have to plan for expansion at the Career Center the way we plan for expansion in the whole rest of the system, I think it's easy to lose sight of the fact that you can't just add, 10% more culinary arts spaces, 10% more radio and TV, auto shop or something like that. These are specialized rooms with very specialized equipment, and you can't just, add 10% more the way you can add 10% more seats in a, in a regular classroom. So we're going to have to pay attention to the demand in the particular labor sector. It's strong in culinary arts now. There was a time, immediately after the 2008 downturn that people weren't going to restaurants. There wasn't the same amount of demand for, labor there. We need the plan for expansion, but it has to be very, very intentionally done because expanding these spaces are going to cost us, quite a bit of money. That has to be planned for in the CIP.
Ms. Salento, I have a follow-up, and I've only asked 4 questions, and you allow 8 per session, right?
Yes, Ms. Van Doren. I try to do 2 rounds, but please follow up.
Thank you. I need to correct something. 800 seats. We have allocated 800 seats in our CIP to fulfill our need for full-time seats in our school system. So that number of 800 seats has to be 800 seats in order for us to meet our needs in our CIP. Therefore, it cannot be CTE seats. So we have to allocate more CTE seats because these other seats are at the other schools, and that 800 seats has to be full-time seats. So I'm going to continue. I will not vote for this unless we address this issue, because what we're going to do is put a crimp on what our kids at the comprehensive high schools can do. Those 800 seats are full-time seats.
Thank you. I have some clarifying questions. So on I think it's this slide, we show 2,194 students at capacity. That's what we can hold. And at that capacity, do these two, and that, it may be too early to tell considering everything that is available at the Career Center, but I'm curious if you do know, if we had this building at capacity, would these students all have equitable access to the classes there through some availability of electives, which I know is a very complicated mathematical scheduling piece, because you have to do that now with your variety of programs that you have there. So I just want to know, when we're building this, we are building it with the idea that every student, all 2,194 students, were it at full capacity, were this to be built, would have access to the CTE courses. It's a balanced build, is that correct? Yes? Okay. Okay, so in that case, I share the concern about the 300 students in the CTE courses from our comprehensive schools, in the sense that I find here at APS, we like to marry ourselves to numbers. So it's not that there's not an intention to grow, or that there's not an intention to open the doors to all of these programs to the best of our ability. We just marry ourselves to numbers. And we never know, people's positions change, leadership changes, board members change. So I just think that maybe, since we do have this flexibility, something that might be considered is that with that extra flexibility, we can say the CTE comprehensive class is 300 to 500 or 600 students, like a range, right? We don't have to, but this way we are showing we're looking to grow. We're going to see. We don't know what the percentage is, but that's an easy adjustment to the ed specs that then matches its capacity, so then you're not going to have that confusion, and you're showing we're meeting the 800 seats in the CIP, we're meeting the 600 seats in the CIP for Arlington Tech growth, we're still maintaining our academic academy programs. It's been a stable number for the years that it's existed, same as PEP, same as Easel Hill, and look, people, we are putting flexibility in for our comprehensive schools to adjust for growth. Because I don't know about doing numbers right now, because I'm not quite sure what our enrollments. I just rather do it in a way that we're showing we're looking for that growth. So any future boards and future leadership will say, we have the ability to grow and provide these options to our students. So I just want to confirm that the 2,194 students would have access to everything in that building. Okay, thank you. Yes, Dr. Cannon, I allowed Ms. Van Doren to follow up. Do you have a follow-up?
I just want to clarify. Are you saying you also, though, want these plus another 300 seats for part-time students?
No. So if you go to the
That's
slide, can you go to slide 14? If you go to slide 14, the total number of students they have calculated for is 1,900. Yeah. The capacity is 2,194. Yeah. So I'm saying that on that line where it says CTE, we would just say, instead of saying minimum, we'd say 300 to 594 seats.
Oh, I see.
So that when you add it up.
Okay. I thought you were adding another set of seats, which
No.
obviously would make the project
No.
bigger and more expensive.
No, I'm
and
just showing,
that's
because
okay, yeah,
understood.
understood.
Yeah, the 600 and the 800 are solid, they're constants, they're part of a CIP, they're specific. And everything else is based on a long historic average. The 300 is growing with our high school population, so that's where that would.
Can I also comment the PEP program will probably grow as well? So the flat number is not
Okay.
useful.
Ms. O'Grady.
I was just going to make an observation I think is correct, because when we say 300 students we really mean 900 students are accessing it. If we were to say that we have a range to 594, that is another 900 potential opportunities for students. So I just wanted to share that, even though it looks like it's that many students, it's really more students than that, because it's 3 sets of students there a third of the time, making up a full student. Thank you.
Thank you very much for being here this evening for the presentation, and this item will come back for action at our next meeting, and we look forward to seeing you again at that time. And I do want to mention, I don't think I mentioned that the first information item that we saw today on the children's school will be coming back for action at our next meeting under the consent agenda. So we are now moving to the next information item on our agenda this evening. We have the capital project status update and transfer, and Ms. Johnson, if you could please present our staff.
So again, I would like to introduce Leslie Peterson and turn it over to her. Thank you.
Good evening again. It is my pleasure to bring this to you this evening as an information item. As a little bit of background, as you know, at any given moment, we have a number of capital construction projects that are underway. And typically, believe it or not, we complete most of our projects under budget. And when we do that, we transfer the resulting savings out of the project. And typically, we transfer that back into the capital reserve so they can be used as needed for other projects. So tonight, we have 5 projects that have recently been completed with savings. They are Abingdon, our Connect Arlington project, McKinley, Syphex Ed Center, and the Yorktown Space Conversion. Savings for these 5 projects total $2.36 million, and that is in addition to the $1.9 million that we transferred for another 4 projects that came in under budget last fall. So we make additions and transfers to and from the capital reserve periodically as a result of school board action. And those can relate to specific projects, like in this case, we have savings from these specific projects. Closeout funds, if the board determines at closeout that they would like to replenish any of the funds that we have available, the reserve funds we have available, including the capital reserve, we might add funds to the capital reserve then. Bond premiums typically go into the capital reserve because they are required to be used for capital projects. And then any other reason that there might be to transfer funds. So right now, we have a reserve balance of 32, or as of May 9th, when the school board adopted its FY20 budget, we had a balance of $32.56 million in the capital reserve. We have some allocations that have already been made, 2 to the HAM project, 1 for the transportation office renovation, and 1 that the school board has approved for the new elementary school at Reed, and that was back in September. In addition, we have 2 additions to the capital reserve, the bond premium from the spring sale, and then $2 million in bond funding that was sold that was not needed for the Heights project. So as of right now, we have about $36.1 million in the capital reserve. We have savings from the completed projects, this $2.36 million that will be added to the capital reserve. The 10-year CIP that was approved by the board in the spring of 2018 requires about $31 million for the Career Center project, and then there's a $1.97 million needed for a field conversion to turf. So if we take those out, that means that we will be about $5.58 million left in the capital reserve. The one thing I would like to note on this, though, is that this assumes that we do not add anything to the capital reserve between now and 7 years from now, because that's the time frame during which we need the $31 million for the capital reserve, for the Career Center, and the $1.97 million for the field conversion. So based on past history, what we've done with bond premiums, what we've done with closeout, I would say that's pretty unlikely that we wouldn't replenish the capital reserve. So this is just an idea of what it would look like if we didn't do anything. And then our recommendation is that we transfer the $2,355,000 that we have in savings from those projects to the capital reserve. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Peterson. Ms. Ricardo, do we have any speakers? Okay. Colleagues, do you have any questions or comments? Okay. Oh, Mr. Goldstein?
Yeah, thank you. Leslie, can you go back to slide, I think it's 4, please? So just refresh me, these numbers in red, the allocations, are funds designated from the capital reserve as as one source of the money needed for that project.
Correct. And in most cases, it is money that we anticipated to be used from the capital reserve because it was outlined in the CIP as either coming from capital reserve or would be part of the jointly funded items, which would come from the capital reserve.
Right, so this, the transportation office, for instance, doesn't mean that that project went 1.87 over budget and needed to.
Not at all.
Okay.
Not at all. These are allocations that we know we will need to make from the capital reserve for projects that are on the books as a result of decisions made by the school board.
And on the next slide, I thought I had a question. No, and that's over, like you said, this is over the next 7 years.
Correct.
Yeah, okay, all right, thank you.
Thank you. This item will come back for action at our next meeting. Thank you, Ms. Peterson.
Thank you.
The next information item is the Ham Middle School change to construction contract and project funding. Ms. Johnson?
Yes, Mr. Chadwick will take the lead on this presentation. Thank you.
Good evening again. So this item is change to the project funding for the Dorothy Ham Middle School project. To summarize, the majority of the building renovation and site work was completed, as you know, in time to welcome students on the beginning of September, first day of school. The construction of the addition was delayed due to rainy weather, to bad soils, and it is now 35% complete, scheduled to be completed in the spring. Unsuitable existing site conditions and a resulting project delay have accounted for the majority of additional costs and have far exceeded what we customarily expect. Based on the cumulative sum of change orders required to date, plus estimated future expenses, an additional $3.9 million in funding is needed to complete the project. Change orders which exceed $100,000 require school board approval, and staff is recommending that increasing funding using available funds from the capital reserve and approving individual change orders that exceed $100,000. As I've just said, the addition is not yet open while the school is open. The enrollment at the school is not equal to the total capacity of the school when completed, and in fact is about the same as the enrollment, I should say, is about the same as it was when the building was used by the H.B. Woodlawn and Shriver programs. We worked very closely with the principal and with teaching and learning supervisors to develop a plan to make sure that we would minimize the impact on instruction caused by delayed opening of the addition. The addition includes an auxiliary gym, it includes changing rooms, it includes the main library and some science and other classrooms. So to accommodate not having those, we turned the room on the right, which is intended to be a teacher collaboration space, into a library, temporary library. It has worked quite well. And because we were a little short on teaching spaces for physical education, we created a one room off the cafeteria, which was originally intended to be a room that could be used with or separately from the cafeteria. Those are very simple renovations and have cost little money to effect. We had some very challenging site conditions. The site has produced substantial challenges, as it says up there, and that has been exacerbated by the rain that we encountered last year. If you think that really the last major rain we had was July the 8th this year, we had rain that almost every day for a very long period, and the time when it's worst for a project, when all the excavation's being done, so it creates the mud that you see in the two slides there on the left and in the middle. Because of that, we had to remove more unsuitable soils than we had allowed for. We always have an allowance for removing unsuitable soils because you never quite know what you're going to find, but that was greatly exceeded. And because of that and the rain and the groundwater, we had to redesign some of the foundations from regular spread footings to pile foundations, which means they're driven in, they go much deeper, and down to where there is bearing that is appropriate as needed for the building. Those, the rain, the redesign, and the different type of foundations caused delays, and additional costs, unfortunately, are always associated with delays. The total cost increase that we're looking at is $3.9 million, of which 3.2 is in construction costs and $700,000 is in owner costs. Let me clarify a little bit the difference between construction costs and owner costs. To make it simple, the construction cost is actually the contract that we've signed with the contractor. So it's everything to do directly with construction. The soft costs are everything else. So they include architecture engineering fees, they include permitting fees to the county, it includes all of the infrastructure for technology, teaching technology, and much of the technology equipment that goes into the building. It includes the furniture. We're not buying all new furniture here, but there is a fair amount of new furniture needed. And then it costs, even includes things like legal fees. So all of those costs are the soft costs. And as you know, when we discuss project costs in Arlington, we're always looking at the total project cost, which is the sum of the construction cost and the soft costs. When you try, as we often find, our projects are compared with projects in other jurisdictions, not only may the costs be different in those locations, but we really don't know what they have included in construction costs and what they've included in soft costs, because it's not generally a clear definition. We're very clear that construction cost is what the contract award is, and then everything else is soft costs. So the original contract sum was $30 million, just under $30.5 million, and that has gone up. The original construction sum was $30,423,369. We had a construction contingency of $1.2 million, and the subtotal of those was $31.623. The increase we're looking at is in estimated change orders of $3.6 million, and we wish to add, because the project isn't finished, there's still, 65% of the addition and some of the site work to do. Because we've expended the contingency already, we are looking to increase that contingency by $800,000. So we're looking at a total increase of 3.2 in the construction costs and $700,000 in the soft costs, which totals 3.9. So let's take a look at what the additional construction cost was, and I'll go into a little bit more detail on some of them. So the excessive rainy weather really resulted in significant construction costs and delays. As I've mentioned, we had to redesign the foundations from spread footings to piles. We had to do additional waterproofing because of all the water that was encountered and the time it was encountered. We had to change the design of the slab on grade, and we had to remove and then replace unsuitable soils. Sequencing revisions and unplanned interim conditions caused by the delays. Examples of those would be that temporary library and physical education space. We have had to do temporary exits for the building, where the exit at the end where the addition is going, where they would have gone through the addition and been designed that way. They have things like overhead protection, temporary installations around them. And as I said, those are revised egress routes. We found some concealed conditions during renovations that required additional management and investment. So, for example, we found more hazardous materials than we had anticipated. We found a lot more lead paint than we had anticipated. And we had to make some major revisions to storm and sewer lines on site because they were found to be in a condition that would not allow the surcharge, because we changed the grading a great deal, so we're putting a lot more load on those, and the county said that those are not in a condition that you can retain them. And then we need some additional contingency to address unplanned and unexpected costs, because we have another few months to go, and as I said, 65% or so of the project, of the addition, still to construct. So just a reminder, we have about $700,000 that we're asking for in additional soft costs, and let me go into those a little bit more in detail. So we have consultant project management services are required due to a staff retirement. We had a staff member who was the project manager who retired, and we've had to supplement that with services from one of our construction manager advisors. Both the architect, engineering team, and the construction management teams have extended costs because the project is going to go on for more months. They have staff costs that are fixed per month. They have insurance costs, and they have other conditions that they have to comply with through the end of the project. And then, as I said, we would like additional contingency to close out the project. We've learned some lessons, and I will go through those with you and explain how we are already implementing them on current projects. We do need to further simplify use permit conditions from the county. As you know, we put a lot of effort into simplifying those use permit conditions on the Reed and Education Center projects. But we still have a way to go with that, because there are still some aspects of the use permit conditions that don't reflect the order and sequence in which buildings are constructed, or at least the way we construct them. We are increasing additional contingencies on the Education Center reuse and on the new elementary school at the Reed site projects, because we have found them to be inadequate. We are conducting more strategic destructive testing. In other words, sometimes you need to go in and make a hole in the wall in order to see what's behind it. So we're planning to do that more on future build projects that include renovation projects. And for example, at the Education Center reuse, the decision was made to do all the demolition as a separate phase, so that the design team could fully survey, and actually they're doing it electronically, the existing building to see all of the existing conditions. We learned quite a bit through that will be incorporated into the construction documents that might not have been caught and which might have caused us an unanticipated extra during construction. That's not to say there won't be some, because there always are. But the building, all the interior demolition there is finished, and we can see everything that will remain that we have to deal with. I should say it's finished except for the windows, because we need to keep them in place. We need to conduct additional subsurface investigations during design and/or increase the allowance for unsuitable soils. We have done that at Reed, even though that was a fairly recent construction project. We are still increasing those allowances. Another thing that we found, we inevitably make value engineering decisions at various points in the project. The ones that can be the most damaging are the ones that are made at the end when we're really trying to bring that project in on budget. And we've learned that they need to be absolutely fully documented and included in the documents. So, for example, now at the Reed site, which started construction last week or the week before, we have included in the documents all of the value engineering items. And unlike on some of the other projects, as you'll see, we have a full building permit for every aspect of the project before we started construction. So that all of that is reflected fully in the construction documents. So the request is to increase the total project funding to $43,050,000 using an additional $3.9 million from the capital reserve. And that would leave the capital reserve that was just presented by Ms. Peterson at $36,090,000. Recommendations to approve the transfer of an additional $3.9 million from the capital reserve to the project, to approve revised project funding as proposed in Exhibit A, which was the previous slide, having a grand total funding available of $43,050,000, and to authorize staff to approve individual change orders exceeding $100,000 that increase the contract sum for the project's construction contract, for the design fee contract, and for the construction manager advisor contract, provided that those change orders do not increase the revised total funding available to the project that's approved by the school board. And also to pursue additional funding from Arlington County to the extent that increased costs are applicable to agreed jointly funded items. We did meet with the county manager and his staff yesterday, and they have agreed to that in principle. We have to provide them with the details. We have not included in the funding request any additional funds beyond from the county beyond those which were originally agreed to when we awarded the contract. So that will in fact be a reduction from the amount that we're asking for. And that is the recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chadwick. Ms. Mercado, are there any speakers? No speakers? Thank you. Colleagues, do you have any questions? All right, Mr. Goldstein.
I do. Thank you. My first question is for the superintendent, and that is, you asked earlier in the week for questions that we would be asking tonight so the staff would be prepared to answer them, and I sent a list of those questions in, and I don't see them reflected here. So my question is, if you're going to ask for advance notice from us about the presentation, what's the purpose of doing so if we don't get that information at the board meeting?
Sometimes the requests for responses take a little bit more time, and the staff needs that time for that follow-up. I'd have to go back and look at those specific questions. Sometimes we follow up with them with follow-up questions, which is part of our procedures as well. I'd have to go back and take a look, and we can provide those answers for you later.
Okay, well, I'll ask them now. I'm particularly interested in staff's assessment of how we can mitigate the extra costs. What kind of revising scope downward did you plan on, assess, talk about, think about? Delaying completion of certain items, back charges to vendors. We were using a construction manager at risk scheme. Where does that fit into this? And additionally, what's the likelihood of needing more funds later in the project? You used the term on one of these slides, maximum cost for the completion of the project. We heard that before. So if I may ask the last question, answer the last question first. That is the absolute maximum that we foresee at this point, and we have put in a substantial number of items that have come from the contractor as a number which we always negotiate below. So we have been very conservative in what we're asking for, and as you know, we spent a great deal of effort and time negotiating every single change request and every single additional cost on a project. But what you've been given here is they're either numbers that have already been negotiated, or they're the number that first came in from the contractor, which we always negotiate down. The second question you had was to do with, could scope be reduced? Because the project is delayed,
almost everything on that project has been bought. So, for example, if we wanted to use a less expensive or I'm not saying it's a very expensive material on the outside of the building in the first place, those tiles have already been ordered. They're in stock somewhere in a warehouse. So we did look at what can we reduce, and at this point in the project, there really is virtually nothing that can be reduced and taken out of the project.
We had a conversation, a weekly meeting back in February about the possibility that this project and also the Heights were going to go over budget. And you brought it to us then because you wanted us to know early so we could make decisions about things that we could adjust in completion and in timing. And I think some of the examples used were not painting a classroom or striping the gymnasium floor or something like that. Now, granted, striping the gymnasium floor doesn't cost a lot of money, but since the project's not completed, is there a possibility of those things waiting until a different funding stream is available?
There may be a very limited number of items like that, yes, we could postpone.
I'd like to see that list. And my last question here is this recommendation, third bullet, authorize staff to approve individual change orders exceeding $100,000. How many of them are there that exceed $100,000?
I don't have an exact number at this point, and I don't know what is going to come up in the future between now and completion of the addition.
When do we find that out? I mean,
We'll
is this just a blanket authority to go ahead and approve change orders for over 100,000 and whenever they come up in the future? Or are we going to see specifically what they are?
The intent here is that we're able to approve them without bringing them back to you for each one.
Mr. Golstein, I'm going to move
I'm done
to-
for now. Thanks.
Dr. Cannon, do you have questions?
Sure, just quickly, and it's actually for Ms. Peterson. We have $36 million in our capital reserve fund. Do we earn interest on those funds?
We do not.
So if there are costs that we might incur this year, or we might choose to delay to do another year because it's a lot at once, those costs are likely to go up if we delayed them. We don't actually end up with a compensating increase in our reserve funds to address a higher cost later.
That would be correct.
So to the extent, and I really appreciate your presentation, we have those reserves. They're not sitting around doing nothing. They are actually planned reserves because we have, upcoming expenses that we are planning. However, we also have reserve funds for emergency situations, a variety of things. So I guess the question becomes, if there's a choice between delaying expenditures or doing them now, using our reserve funds, is there an advantage to delaying?
I would say that there's not, for the very reason that you mentioned earlier, which is the longer we take to do it, the more it will cost.
Thank you.
And typically, if an item is within the contract, it's at the best cost that we can get it. If we decided that we weren't going to do it and we took it out of the contract, but decided a year from now that we wanted to do it, we don't get it for the same price that we do under the contract. It's now a separate piece of work that needs to be done, and then we would have to, depending on the cost, bid it out separately, which would also tend to increase the price.
And Ms. Peterson is reminding me there's another aspect of taking things out of the project. You never get the full value of them as the saving offered by the contractor.
Thank you, Dr. Cannon. Ms. Van Doren, do you have any questions?
First, I want to thank you, Mr. Chadwick, and the entire team for the work on this project. I had an opportunity last spring to tour while they were finishing, I think it was the 9 rain gardens at the site. Is that correct? There are 9?
I don't have the number in my head.
Yeah, I think I toured all of them and saw as they were beginning to put the foundation in for the addition, the very unique process they had to use to put those in, which was unanticipated. I was also the liaison to this project in the planning process, and people were on that BLPC who had been on the previous edition's BLPC, and a lot of information was provided about previous experiences with this site. So despite all of that, we ran into the 1,000-year flood summer and some very unique situations. So I know that in the work with the CMR that there is a way in which we have to deal with those situations which simply couldn't be anticipated. So I just wanted to acknowledge that and acknowledge the work because I saw firsthand what you all were having to do. And I thank you for doing it, and it's going to be beautiful. And years from now, we'll appreciate all this great work, as we do. We had the opening just this past week, so thank you.
Thank you.
The one question I have to ask is that in the work closing this out, while I know you don't want to keep coming back to us, I would request that every effort be made with our contractors to rein in the costs, to negotiate them down as far as you can, because every penny we save here goes to adding more seats in the CIP, and we really need to do that. So we really can't afford this overrun, but we have it. In which case, I would love the good news to be when you close this out that you didn't spend all this. And please, please, please ride the contractors to make that happen.
I would like nothing better myself. We do not like coming to you in any way to ask to increase the funding available for the project. And it's the first time in recent years that we've done this. We do not like that.
So we'll work hard to try to keep
Yes.
them down.
Our team works very hard on that. There are many meetings, a lot of analysis, and it's not easy.
Thank you, Ms. Van Doren. Ms. O'Grady?
Thank you, Chair Talento. I did have some questions that I submitted before the meeting, and I think some of those have been addressed in the presentation. Are we expected to have additional expenditures? And I think that you've shared with us that this is the top amount that you anticipate.
Correct.
We will be seeing from this project. Are we doing anything to keep costs from escalating?
Everything we can.
And also, that what are we doing to try to reduce the costs that we're being asked to approve? You just went over that with Ms. Van Dorn, and also lessons learned, and you had a slide of what you've learned in order to try to ameliorate any overruns in the future. I would also like to say that, yes, I think the flood caught us a little flat-footed, and that unfortunately is a very bad situation for us when we're tight on money. But one, I think that in whether it's a school or commercial building, et cetera, sometimes these things happen, unfortunately. I would like to ask you, Mr. Chadwick, when it comes to earlier presentation we had, the audit report that Mr. Mickelvike is going to be working on, we talked about the construction report that we had last year to try to figure out ways to evaluate our building costs. And in the new audit report or plan that we just approved, we're going to be looking at 5 other areas moving forward that may help us. Do you think that those areas may be able to help us if we run in? Hopefully we'll never run into something like this again, but do you think they could potentially be helpful?
Some of them may. However, as Mr. Mickelvike pointed out, we have to be very clear, be very careful that we don't spend more on doing them than we're going to save by affecting them.
Okay, so I think that it shows that we are interested, at least in figuring out other ways to continue to keep our building costs.
We always want to do better.
And we appreciate that because our community wants to see us do the best we can with the money that they give us to run the system and build seats.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chadwick, for the presentation. I do want to just make a comment because, Mr. Goldstein, since I've come on the board, I've always been encouraged to provide questions before any board meeting early, and we've all done it, and there have been times where they've been answered in the presentation and times where we actually asked them at the dais. So, Ms. Johnson, I know that you're recently appointed our interim superintendent, and if you, perhaps we need to have a discussion as the board as what our expectation is if it's not the same expectation. So I just point that out to just be reflective on the fact that I didn't expect the questions that have been submitted prior to this time to be answered in the PowerPoint. It's a courtesy that we try to provide to our staff so that they don't come before us without the answers, because it's clear that none of us have numbers and data and information programmed into our brain, and we need to bring that research and information to the dais at times. So just make that comment, and colleagues, if you want to change that process, then we need to have that discussion and make a note to the public that we post our documents as soon as they are available for posting with minimal change thereafter. And so if we are going to change our process, then we are probably going to be posting documents much later, because if we aren't to meet our questions in time, we're asking for we may potentially be asking for significant changes in presentation. So just point that out as we move in the discussion as to how we want to move forward in that process.
Thank you for that.
I did have a question on the third bullet. I understand the concern about that some of my colleagues have expressed in us authorizing this, and I just want to get some clarification. You know, we do have to answer to our community for the tax dollars that go into our system. This is an overage that we didn't budget for. We are taking it out of our capital reserves. Ideally, at this point, and because of overages, I think it would be necessary to have this come to the board every time. However, I recognize that we only have 2 board meetings every month, and it is not practice that we have to do information and action immediately. And so my question is, if we were to demand that every time you have a change order of $100,000 come to the board, do you anticipate that would delay it? Can you tell us a little bit more about why you're asking this, with the understanding that we do have to answer to our constituents? And that's what I'm assuming. That is what I've understood, but I want to make sure that I haven't misunderstood.
There are several reasons. One is what you said, in that you only have so many board meetings and so many items on the board meetings. The other thing is that it may well delay the project depending on what the item is. And at this point, we can't afford to delay the project at all, because people need to be paid for their work and continue. And I think the other reason is we don't want to keep coming with, here's another cost for the HAM project. Here's another cost for the HAM project, because it's always been very hard to explain to people, no, we haven't increased the improved funding available. We are spending funds within the amount that has been approved by the school board. I'd say 3 reasons probably why we prefer to do that.
And so all of these change orders would not exceed what you're asking for. They're within that cost.
If they were such that they would cause us or risk us increasing the amount, going over the amount that you've approved as the total funding available, then they would have to be brought to you by the way we've written this.
And your goal is to reduce costs and try to bring back savings from what you're asking us to transfer. So this would, in effect, this request is allowing you to be efficient in your ability to get the work completed?
Yes.
Okay. It's not a comfortable request, but I want to make sure that I understand the ramifications if I were not to approve it as a board member. Okay, thank you. That is a question I have now. Mr. Goldstein, do you have additional questions as we go into our second round of questions?
Well, given what you said about posting the presentation ahead of time and minimal changes, then can we have this presentation changed to include the questions that I asked ahead of time before we see it at the next board meeting?
I think that's a question for you, Ms. Johnson. I don't know if that's something that can be accommodated. or if you have another suggestion, like an FAQ page, I don't know.
I'd like some time to reflect on what's being requested here with staff.
Do you want me to submit it as a follow-up, that question, in writing?
I think that would be helpful.
Okay.
But I'm also hearing that the school board members would have further discussion around the practice.
Well, no, I'm just asking that we're going to see this again for action in 2 weeks, and at that time, we could be seeing a fuller presentation, with the answers from the questions that we've
So
had.
specific to this request, I would appreciate the follow-up.
Dr. Ken, do you have a comment in regard to
I
this?
do. I want to comment on this request because I think it's a little above and beyond what we normally expect when we submit our questions for board meetings in advance. Generally, we do that as a courtesy to staff. We try to do it. We can't always. Often we have spontaneous questions at the table that we didn't think of in advance, but we try to share our questions so that they can be prepared to answer them. Or often what I find is they will verbally make a comment to answer the question in their presentation. I have never personally expected my questions to be incorporated into PowerPoint, and I think that is something that we should absolutely be leaving to staff to determine if it's part of the story they're telling in their PowerPoint. Anyway, so I just want to share that because I think it's an above and beyond request to expect that, because once it's done with one presentation, we're then setting a precedent and expecting that with everything we ask. That's not fair to staff and our superintendent.
Thank you, Dr. Kennan. Mr. Goldstein, do you have additional questions on the presentation?
No, I don't have additional questions. No.
Okay. Anyone else have additional questions on this presentation? Okay, we will bring this item back for action at our next meeting. Thank you, Mr. Chadwick, for the presentation. And then we're going to move to our last item, which is the Heights building change to construction contract and project funding. And Mr. Chadwick, you'll also be presenting this? Okay, great. So, whenever you're ready, please proceed.
So this is a request to change project funding on the Heights building. As you well know, the school opened on time to welcome students on September the 3rd. The auditorium does remain under construction and will be completed within the next few weeks. Based on the cumulative sum of the changes required to date, plus estimated future expenses, an additional $5.6 million in funding is needed to complete the project. Again, individual change orders which exceed $100,000 per policy require school board approval, and staff recommends increasing the funding available using funds from the capital reserve and approving individual change orders that exceed $100,000. Sorry, I think I went 2 slides. No. Okay. So the current state of what you've approved is a total of $101 million, and that was the funding that you approved when you approved and awarded the contract for construction in January of 2018. That gave you a construction total of just under $81.5 million, $2.4 million in construction contingency, for a total of $83.881 construction costs, and owner soft costs of $17.1 million, again for a total project cost of $101 million. The breakdown, obviously, between construction costs and soft costs is the same as it was on the previous project. And thank you. So let us take a look here at what the additional construction costs were and to what we attribute them. The one thing that actually isn't on this list that is particularly significant on this project, because it's gone on so long, is this has been a period of incredible construction activity in the Washington metropolitan region. And because that has caused costs to go up in and of itself, but there is also a limited labor pool in this area, and that means that those costs go up even higher than other costs. So we had some challenges with the urban location, including those other two projects that are being built next to us, one right next to us and one on the other side of 18th Street. They have added to the complexity. So, for example, we found some coordination needed below grade to coordinate the shoring up of the huge excavations. The Penzance building dug a hole 5 floors below grade. We go down 2 floors below grade, and Penzance is right on the property line. As you construct those walls, there's underpinning that goes either way to make sure that they don't fall out, that is not structural once the walls are being poured. There was a lot more coordination of that than we anticipated, and that caused us quite a bit of additional cost. The other aspect of that was that we had to do ours first to meet our schedule, and they started their project quite a bit after us, and also worked out some of the details of their project after we started. Another major aspect of the project that's added to the cost, and the county will be contributing to this as they are on the original joint fund, is the reconstruction of 18th Street. 18th Street was little more than a country lane when this project started, and it will be a full urban street to county standards. We didn't really believe that we should be rebuilding it since it was in that condition, and the county agreed with that by supporting quite a bit of the cost. But nevertheless, we decided that we had to do it with our project since we were the first one to be finished and it needed to be in place and the grading worked around our project. So there were a lot of extra things we found there, including some utilities below it that weren't where they were meant to be. We found a lot of issues with public utilities, which is one of the later bullet points on here. And that was specifically to do with the timing of permanent power and the temporary heat required during construction. So the project started on a schedule for doing the various phases of the project. Because we need permanent power before we can use the HVAC systems in the building to keep the building tempered. And the building needs to be tempered when a lot of the finishes go in. For example, drywall, the building must be tempered, or we come back to the discussion we had earlier about mold. And also, we can't use the elevator until we have permanent power. So because there were delays in the design of the vault and in the design of the utility lines, it cost us quite a bit of money to keep that building heated, because that wasn't anticipated in the contractor's bid. As I said, we had a lot of redesign of the vault, and in fact, the vault is for the transformer. It's right there on 18th Street, not on 18th Street, I'm sorry, on Wilson Boulevard, in front of the theater wall. If we hadn't been in an urban location, we wouldn't even have had to bury the transformer in the first place. And we also found a whole series of utility conflicts that were in. So as an example of that, there was a fire hydrant actually in front of the Penzance property that's needed for us to have our fire, meet our fire code. Well, all of a sudden, 3 weeks before we were completed, it was removed, and because it was in the way of the Penzance project, and we had to all of a sudden put another one in. Now, of course, we're working on who actually pays for that, but that was 3 weeks before the end of the project, and we had to scramble in order to get it in place so that the building could open on time. We paid some acceleration costs to stay on schedule. They mostly had to do early in the project with steel and concrete erection, and they included some double shifts for a while to make sure that the overall schedule was maintained. And then we had some unanticipated costs that arose because of the dense urban project. And as construction progressed, we found anticipated conditions that required more details and documentations for full completion of the project, which meant we had to go back to the architecture engineering team for more documentation during the construction phase, which added additional costs. We had unsuitable soils and contaminated soils at this site. We encountered something we've never encountered before. We did our normal testing for contaminated soils because there had been at one point a gas station on the 7-Eleven property, and we thought we had it nailed and we had a good allowance. We in fact found as we were excavating that there were pockets of oil and contaminated soil all over the site, and that cost us a considerably larger amount than we'd expected. We also found some unanticipated soft conditions below some of the footings, and we had to deal with that with more excavation and fill. We had some field revisions by inspectors. Usually, we always expect some. We had a very large one to do with enclosing a duck chase on the 5th floor of the building 3 weeks before the building opened, and that meant that we had to put a whole lot of effort into finishing that, because if we hadn't finished that, we wouldn't have achieved occupancy of the building. So we're looking for additional contingency to address on any further unexpected costs during closeout. The soft costs, to remind you, we're looking at about $4.85 million in construction costs and $750,000 in soft costs. They mostly had to do with some additional design fees, consultant project management. I'm sorry, I'm not on the right slide here. Some project management services required because we had some unexpected turnover in staff. We usually spend less than the utility companies have estimated for our connections, but in this urban location, we actually found out that we had to spend more than they had estimated for their connections. So based on this experience, we have again learned some lessons. Some of them are the same lessons that we've learned on the HAM project. But the biggest thing I think we've learned here is that more consultant services are required in design, particularly to do with utility planning, than we have done in our in the less dense parts of the county. So we will be employing additional consultant services on the Career Center project, where it's likely we will find the same nexus of utilities that we found here that really need to be sorted out. We need to keep the design phases on schedule, and because delays during construction cannot be mitigated. And the good news on that is that on the Reed project, as I mentioned earlier, we're starting that project straight with all of our permits in place. And so all of those permit requirements are included in the construction documents. Because of the complexity of the Heights project, we had several different permits during the course of the project. And so we had to bid each one separately, and that was in order to keep the project on track. That was like excavation, footings and foundations, and then the building to grade. We found again that minimizing the number of building permits that are required and the number of times we go to the county reduces the permit fees. It reduces the stress on everybody. I don't know that it could have been avoided on this project, but it has been avoided on the Reed project because we only had one permitting phase. We do need to conduct additional subsurface investigations, but I'm really not sure we ever could have found the amount of contaminated soil that we did on this site. And again, we need to fully document value engineering decisions before we proceed, and make sure that we are more generous on our contingencies. So here again is the project funding exhibit showing what it was originally and where we're requesting it now. We're requesting increase in total project funding to $106.6 million, using an additional $5.6 million from the capital reserve. And again, before this and HAM, the current capital reserve stands at $36,090,000. The recommendations are pretty much the same as on HAM, to approve transfer of additional $5.6 million from the capital reserve to the project, to approve revised total funding of $106.6 million, and we have the same item in there about approving change orders of over $100,000 to keep the project on track, and to pursue additional funding from Arlington County. And as I explained, they have given us verbal agreement to that. We haven't yet agreed on the numbers. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chadwick. Ms. Mercado, do we have any speakers? Okay. Colleagues, I expect we have questions. Mr. Goldstein, do you want to start us off?
Sure. Thank you. I don't know what slide it is. When we were talking about this project last week, I think you said, or I learned that there were 95 additional change orders. Is that for this project? That has prompted
we talked about the number of bulletins and change. Yes. I'm not sure what number you're referring to, because there were more than 95, and I'm not sure what the starting point was.
Okay, so I guess that's my question, is when were the additional change orders issued or authorized?
They've been issued almost up to date through the course of the project. They have not all been negotiated yet, just as I explained on HAM. So we put in there the numbers of what the contractor has asked for, where we haven't negotiated it, so we have a maximum on that.
All right, let me ask the question another way. Were you authorizing, or I don't know what the right word is, issuing change orders beyond the approved project budget? Knowing that you would have to come here and get an increase in the...
The reason we're coming to you at this point is because we cannot do that without further authorization from the school board. So we haven't gone beyond what's approved in funding, but to complete the project, we need this extra amount.
So if you get the extra amount, then you have a plan for issuing additional change orders.
After substantial negotiation.
That will then take us to the end of the project.
Yes.
Okay. All right, sorry, I got to get my list of questions here. Yeah, same question as as HAM. Are there areas, maybe the right word is value engineering, are there areas where value engineering can be applied at this point so that we can, and possibly wait for the next budget, the next bond, the next funding stream or something to complete some piece of this project so that we don't have to spend an additional $5.6 million now?
The simple answer is really no. This project is completed. We have almost everything in the project that's going to be there. The HAM project's a little different because it isn't completed. There's still 65% of the addition to be built, but this is all done now. And we have been looking all the way through at doing that, and there are some items that we have already deferred that are not included in the budget, and they're not included in the $5.6 million request.
If the project is already completed, I don't understand why What's the additional 5.6 for?
Because there are change orders that we have not yet negotiated. There are soft costs that we need to complete the project. And the additional funding is required to complete the project.
Sorry, I'm confused. You're expecting that there will be change orders.
There may be a few more. Let me explain it this way. Maybe it's easier. There is always retainage. So we've retained from every payment to the contractor, we retain a percentage. I would have to look at the contract to see exactly what it is. There's a fair amount of money that we have not paid to the contractor and won't for some time. So we've been able to pay to date for everything that we've had to pay for. But in order to complete the project, we will need to finally pay for those, all of that retention as we close out the project. We release it in tranches as we go through the closeout process.
Yeah, okay. All right, that makes more sense to me. Yeah, and again, I'd be interested in seeing the additional change orders, over 100,000, the ones that require school board approval. Okay,
Thank you, Mr. Goldstein. Ms. Van Doren, do you have any questions? Dr. Cannon, do you have any questions? Ms. O'Grady, do you have any questions?
Just one question. Mr. Chadwick, this is our first time being in an urban setting to build a school, and does that create many more complications?
It has. And it's been even more complicated because we were part of a development renewal area, the North Roslyn, I can't even remember what it was called now, but RAPS, thank you. Western Roslyn Area Planning Study. Yes, so having the need to coordinate not just with existing buildings around the site and existing utilities to coordinate with new buildings as well made it very complicated. The temporary firehouse on our property also has added any amount of complexities to our project.
Thank you. Lessons learned, and as we have to look at other places to build schools. Thank you.
Yes.
Ms. Van Doren?
I just want to thank the staff again and remind the community that we had to open 2 new buildings, a renovated building with an addition pending, and 2 refurbished buildings on time for the opening of school. That's 5 facilities. And with the same staff you've always had, you did that. And the kids entered on that first day of school. Thank you for that. I'm very sorry about these overruns, and I hope, again, that you can put pressure on your contractors to keep those costs below, and you'll bring back savings.
We
and
will.
I really hope you convey that, because, again, every penny we spend here is money we don't spend on needed projects in the future. But I have to say that for me, this to me is a harbinger of the future. Not that we should have overruns, but that all your lessons learned have to be permanent lessons learned, because I don't see any uncomplicated projects in our future.
No, and
so I'm glad you're doing that.
And we're going to learn new lessons on every new project.
Well, let's learn these and come in under budget and get some money back here.
We're going to try very hard to do that.
Thanks.
As I said before, this is not something that we do easily.
Thank you, Ms. Van Doren. I have a couple of questions. You mentioned there were a couple of costs that we had to, or what I understood was that there are a couple of parts of the project that were going to be taken care of by the county or something to that effect. But we had to do it because of timing issue, because we have a very hard deadline to opening the doors for our students. So we are pursuing, and was it just the county or was there someone else?
It's really the county.
Okay.
The joint fund is usually 50-50 on our projects, or the jointly funded, I should say. But on this project, some items were funded 100% by the county, like expenses to do with the firehouse. Some were, I believe, the county paid 75% of the reconstruction of 18th Street, and then others were at 50% because they were shared community amenities. So it's a little more complicated on this project.
So for some of the, but we had to pay up front, and then they're going to
Yes.
reimburse us.
Yes.
So for some of these, we expect full reimbursement, and for others, we may have to negotiate reimbursement. Is
Yes.
that correct? Okay, and then what I wanted to get clarification on is, when you say a change order, I was trying to understand what Mr. Goldstein was asking, and I think I understand, and I'm just getting clarification on it. The project is completed. Are change orders for a punch list, or are these change orders that have already been completed but that we owe money and that had to get completed to ensure a timely opening? So it wasn't like we had a choice where, you know, it was something that was a requirement for the building. Can you help us understand that a little bit?
Most of it, as I said, we have retainage, so we haven't
Yes.
paid them everything.
Right.
So we have funds to pay them everything that we needed to, or we've negotiated to date.
Correct.
But now we've gone beyond that. So yes, most of those items were items we needed to add to the project to finish the building, obtain our occupancy permits and our building permits.
Okay. So the change orders that have already occurred, and if you had stopped that process, we would not have opened on time.
That is correct.
So at this point, we're negotiating change orders. The amount that you have provided us in overage is an estimate that covers what you expect the maximum negotiation price would be for
Yes.
these, and the hope is that you're going to negotiate all of these change
Yes.
orders down and bring us back savings.
Absolutely.
But you don't want to give us a number that is so conservative that you'd have to come back because you weren't able to negotiate it down to where you think you're going to.
And
Is that
because
correct?
I don't want to come back here again
Okay.
with this request.
Okay. And then, can you help us explain, I had someone ask me about a CMR, and I couldn't recall if this project, I wasn't on the board when this project was approved. Was this a CMR project?
Yes, all of the Fleet, Ham, and Heights projects were our first construction manager at risk projects.
Okay.
And I have to tell you, certainly on this project, if we had had a design bid build, we probably would not have opened the building on time, and we would likely be asking for a lot more money.
Okay.
So it has very much helped us on the three projects that we're building now.
So I think the misunderstanding with the person I was speaking to is that they thought when we had CMR, there was a maximum gross price, and that it would not exceed that, or if that it did, it would be on the builder.
There is a term, that contractual term, that's used that is deeply confusing to people.
Okay.
That's a guaranteed maximum
Thank you.
price.
Yes, that's the one.
And often that is negotiated earlier in a project when when owners want to rush forward and build more quickly. We pretty much negotiate that on full documents, but it isn't guaranteed for everything, and so we are now calling it the contract sum rather than guaranteed maximum price, so people don't think there won't be extras, because there always will be extras. There always will be things that the construction manager couldn't possibly have included in his price.
Okay, that's very helpful information. I just want to be able to clarify that with people who ask us.
It's a very confusing term.
There was this understanding, and that is not how I had understood it. It is a negotiated price expecting perfect conditions, which never happens in a construction project. So with those perfect conditions, you plan with contingency to cover those imperfections. And when you have unexpected costs like we did on this, especially considering the urban build, the buildings surrounding this urban build that caused delays, the additional utility expenses that we had not experienced at other projects that were not an urban environment. We could not have planned for that considering it's our first urban build. But if we do another urban build, we'll have to recognize that contingency costs would probably have to be a lot higher budgeted in.
Yes, and more, as I said, we are going to have some additional expertise on our team.
Excellent.
To make sure that we've covered that and that the amounts that we're allotting in contingency to the risks associated with that location are more appropriate.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Chadwick. Are there any other additional questions, comments? Okay, Mr. Goldstein?
Yeah, okay, I just want to be clear. There are many, speaking of both projects here, there were many unavoidable reasons why these projects have cost overages today. I understand that. We started having this conversation about overages back in the early spring, and then we were given a number in late spring that was the estimate of what those overages were. After that point, if I understand this right, you issued or authorized, I'm not sure what the right word is, additional change orders to be sure that the project opened on time. That was the point that you needed to bring information to the school board, even if you didn't have exact numbers. But at that point, we knew that the costs were going to rise above the number that we got in June. Instead, we got this information last week, and we need to take action on it next week, because that's the point we're going to run out of money. So I am not happy with the time frame and the decision to wait to inform the board about this situation. I think going forward, we need to reevaluate when you decide that costs will increase and when you need to tell the board about it.
Mr. Goldstein, I want to clarify, because we were informed in February, as you stated, so they did tell the board. However, there was no requirement for an action at that time, so it did not come to a board meeting. So are you requesting that when there are potential for overages, we get a monitoring item so that we then have it information to the public, and every few months as they're looking at potential overages, it comes to the board as a what exactly are you requesting? Because my understanding is the reason that this is being brought to us today is because they have an actionable number that they feel confident will not go over to address the overage and close out this project. And we were informed, they did inform us in February, as you just mentioned in our regular briefings, but it did not come to a board meeting. So what are you asking? Because that would be a monitoring item, I'm guessing?
Not necessarily.
So there would be no action to that. So what are you asking?
An alert that costs were going over the number that we were given in June.
At a public board meeting? Because they did tell us that in February.
In some way.
You just stated, I just want to clarify what you're asking for specifically, because staff did come to us in February. They did come to us over the summer. They said they were doing everything they can to keep costs down. They were looking at what they were doing. They weren't sure what the overage was going to be, so they didn't have anything to bring forward. So if you're asked, so I just, as we move forward, I want to be clear what we're asking staff.
Okay. We started having this conversation in February. In June, we got a number. After June, things happened, and we were not alerted to the fact that that number that we got in June was not really going to be the number that we needed to hear about today and approve next week.
Okay.
That's the part I want to get more advance notice on. I don't have to have exact numbers. I need to have somebody tell me, these costs are going up. We told you it was this number back in June. It's not anymore. They're going up.
Mr. Chadwick, I have a question to try to clarify this discussion. When were you able to understand that the numbers that you gave us this summer when you were discussing overages with us and that you would be coming to us with a request, when did you recognize and what time frame that it was going to go over than those anticipated numbers? And I just am trying to understand, was there a delay or was it fairly quickly? Because I think there may be a misunderstanding, or if there was a delay, then we can work on this communication piece.
I would say that the full amount really only became evident around the beginning of August, and that we were working very hard on then from then on to get, not only to finish the building, but also to get a handle on where it would actually be and what the maximum amount that we will be able to bring to you would be. There have been many iterations of, the information we presented to you, and there was a lot of collaboration with finance, and so that was really sort of around the beginning of August. It really became apparent, no, it's quite a bit more. Initially, we thought it was a little bit more. That might be a more acceptable amount, but then it became clear it was going to be more than that.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. Thank you, Mr. Goldstein, for your comment. I'm sure we can find a way to have that discussion amongst the board and determine how we'll proceed with future projects and sharing information. Again, thank you for the presentation. Thank you, colleagues, for the questions. This item will come back for action at our next meeting, and we are now at new business. Board members, is there any new business? Seeing none, this meeting is adjourned.